Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Me of Revolution, and U.S. military revolts over killings of alleged drug dealers. Is Trump a war criminal? Black general stands up and has dignity. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution? Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Let's get right into the content tonight. Salute.
Utter turmoil and chaos taking place in the United States military right now as yet another top.
Well, for getting this membership to the Revolution, to the House of Revolution. Revolution is where life. Salute, family. I appreciate the love.
Commander has suddenly resigned. This time, the top commander in Latin America, Alvin Halsey, suddenly quit less than 1 year into his tenure as the head of Southern Command, the individual in charge of the United States Navy in Latin America. Apparently, this resignation comes based on his strong opposition to the Trump regime's war crimes taking place off the coast in Venezuela and Colombia, where the Trump regime continued to demand unlawful orders be carried out in the form of blowing up these fishing boats off the coast of Venezuela and Colombia as well. Here's the reporting. 4-star Admiral Alvin Halsey, head of Southern Command, stepping down after less than a year in his position. One of the U.S. officials said that Admiral Halsey had raised concerns about the mission and the attacks on alleged drug boats. The reporting from CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, and others is as follows. Tensions were simmering between Secretary of Defense, who unlawfully refers to himself as Secretary of War, former Fox News host Pete Hegseth, and Halsey for weeks. Hegseth did not believe that Halsey was moving quickly and aggressively enough to combat drug traffickers in the Caribbean and complained about not being given info he needed about ops per sources. But Southcom, which is what Admiral Halsey led, was concerned about the operations not being lawful. In other words, that war crimes were being committed, and Admiral Halsey did not want to be a part of these war crimes. I can't emphasize enough how unusual a resignation like this is, and I think it demonstrates what I think will soon take place with mass resignations amongst the top admirals and generals. We've seen others quitting as well. More on that in a moment. As Phil says, U.S. Admiralty was born after the Civil War. A 4-star admiral quitting mid-operation, the way Halsey just did, is a rupture of that order. Halsey's exit amid lethal Caribbean strikes is a 5-alarm warning. Trump and Hegseth are pushing unlawful orders and driving commanders out. The Admiral's revolt has begun. The Admiral's revolt against the Trump regime has begun. And Admiral Halsey was one of the most, not the most, respected admiral of them all. So this one account puts it, if the commander of Southern Command is stepping down less than a year into his tenure, I'm guessing we're about to find out the intelligence picture on these narco-terrorist, quote, narco-terrorist vessels that we are blowing out of the water isn't as solid as it's being portrayed.
See, he's saving himself from being convicted for committing war crimes, and he's leaving that on Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, and Trump. What he did is absolutely a brave thing. Trump probably gonna target him, but he found it's illegal what they're doing. They're not killing no narco traffickers. They're killing illegal people, and some people from Trinidad was killed. That people want answers. Some people survived the attack today. It's all falling apart, but they're gonna try to continue.
Now, here is the statement of the 4-star Admiral Alvin Halsey upon his resignation and retirement. He says as follows, it's been an honor to serve our nation, the American people, and support and defend the Constitution for over 37 years. Effective December 12, 2025, I will retire from the U.S. Navy. Serving as your commander and deputy for the past 34 months has been a tremendous honor. The Southcom team has made lasting contributions to the defense of our nation and will continue to do so. I am confident that you will forge ahead focused on your mission that strengthens our nation and ensures its longevity as a beacon of freedom around the globe. Stephanie and I extend our deepest gratitude and appreciation for the opportunity to have served alongside our nation's finest warfighters. Keep charging. And Admiral Alvin Halsey, in that message, I think you could read between the lines of some of the coded message he was sending to other leaders in the military and other members of the Navy. Now, this comes as well as a Marine colonel quit after 24 years, citing concern for the future of the United States under Trump. Yep, a former United States Marine Corps colonel and combat veteran said that after 24 years of service, he resigned from the military because of Trump, citing what he described as the U.S. president's contempt for the Constitution. Doug Krugman left his role in the military on September 30th, coinciding with the day that Donald Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth delivered that hyper-partisan, controversial address to the U.S. military leaders brought to a special meeting in Quantico, Virginia from across the world about military priorities and the regime's agenda. Quote, "I gave up my career out of concern for our country's future," Krugman wrote in an op-ed for the Washington Post. He even warned of a collapse of the conventional United States government system. That's right, a 5-alarm fire. Now, just to remind you, at that event by Pete Hegseth, where he called all the top generals and all the top admirals, including Admiral Halsey, Hegseth said the following. Let's play this clip.
Leaders who have given decades to our great republic at great sacrifice to yourselves and to your families. But if the words I'm speaking today are making your heart sink, then you should do the honorable thing and resign. We would thank you for your service.
So clearly, Admiral Halsey responded and said, "I'm getting the hell out of here because you are all engaged in war crimes right now, and I am not going to be a part of it when there may be war crimes tribunals that could be held in the future as a result of what this dastardly Trump regime is doing." More on that in a moment as well. Tennessee Holler, an ABC report. The military commander overseeing operations in Latin America, which included several lethal strikes on alleged drug boats, is stepping down. Hegseth did not immediately respond to a request for comment about why Admiral Alvin Halsey was leaving. Now, this comes at the same time as well that a 5th fishing boat off the coast of Venezuela was blown up. But for this one, there were survivors, NBC and others were reporting. The U.S. military carried out a strike against an alleged Venezuelan drug cartel boat in international waters in the Caribbean. And for the first time, there were survivors, according to U.S. officials. Now, this follows Donald Trump posting earlier this week that another fishing boat you see there was blown up. The United States has carried out at least 5 of these war crimes against these fishing boats, that is, with at least 21 murders taking place. Blood on the hands of Donald Trump and Hegseth. We also know that at least one of these boats appeared to be Colombian in origin, not Venezuelan. And there's a lot of reporting that it seems that these are not actually even drug dealers on these boats, but they were just fishing boats. And in any event, if you take a look at these boats, they're small boats. They don't seem like they even have the fuel to get to the United States. There's been zero transparency on this at all. But don't take my word for this if when I call it a war crime. How about the ranking Democrat in the House Intelligence Committee, Jim Himes? Okay, the top Democrat. He would be part of the Gang of Six. You know, he's like the as high as you go, Democrat in the intelligence space. Congressmember Jim Himes, this is what he had to say about it. Play this clip.
One of the many troubling aspects about these lethal attacks in the Caribbean against supposedly drug dealing boats. Now, we don't know that because unlike our counterterrorism programs, the Congress is not being told who were on these boats, how they were identified, what the intelligence was. Totally different thing. Congress is being told nothing on this. And that's okay, apparently, with the Republican majorities in the House and the Senate. It's not okay with me. I'm going to leave a little bit of a crack in the door here because, again, the White House has not shared what they believe their legal justification is. They did put out a memo. I will tell you that based on what I know now and the reading of that memo, these are illegal killings. They are illegal killings because the notion that the United States, and this is what the administration says is their justification, is involved in an armed conflict with any drug dealers, Venezuelan drug dealers, is ludicrous. It wouldn't stand up in a single court of law.
They say they've designated them as terrorists.
It doesn't matter.
Therefore,
It doesn't matter. There's
use
lots of people who have been designated terrorists. That does not automatically give the authority to take lethal action.
And then I had Congressman Himes on our program here on the Midas Touch Network, and here's what he said yesterday.
No, that's not the only thing he said. He also said Trump may get immunity, but what about Rubio? What about Hegseth? What about the admirals and generals that are going along with the illegal orders? He said Trump is probably going to have to sign a bunch of pardons because all of this is illegal. And that black admiral retired. He refused to go to prison over what Trump is doing.
About these war crimes, these unlawful strikes taking place off the coast of Venezuela. Let's play it.
As an intelligence guy, I can tell you this. If you've got the capability to blow a boat out of the water, you've got the capability to interdict it, to arrest everyone on board, to interrogate them. And now you're finding out where it was going, where it came from, who the bosses are, who the distribution networks are. When you turn a bunch of people into a smoking wreck, you don't get any of that stuff. All you get is a bunch of testosterone-fueled White House aides pounding on their chest. Again, illegal. And I'm on my soapbox about this, Ben, because too many of my Republican colleagues are like, we should do more of this. We should do, oh, it's so great to see it's Hollywood and stuff. Folks, we always regret that kind of thinking. You know, when we put Japanese Americans into concentration camps in the United States in World War II, at the time, that probably seemed like a good idea. Did not seem in retrospect like a good idea, right? The McCarthy era where we were ruining people, you know, a senator from Wisconsin ruining people's careers. Well, they were communists, they deserve it. And in retrospect, those are the darkest moments in our history. And so I'm going to keep sounding the alarm on this because 10 years from now, this is going to turn out to be yet another assault on the rule of law. And by the way, a really bad way of stopping the flow of drugs into our country.
Now, I want to show you briefly some clips right now that involve Admiral Halsey. Great man, great admiral. Here's Admiral Halsey. This was in 2023. This was in 2023 at an event he gave at Concordia. And here he talks about his role. This is when he was vice admiral at the time. He was then since promoted even more. But here he was over here talking about the importance of partnership with countries in the region. And you can hear him how important that was, working with countries collaboratively. So you can imagine just how infuriated is probably not even the right word. It must have made him to see war crimes being committed in that region. Let's play this first clip.
At U.S. Southern Command, we are one of the 6 geographic combatant commanders for the Department of Defense. And so in that role, we're responsible for overseeing the contingency planning operations, as well as a security cooperation in the Central America, South America, and the Caribbean, in our neighborhood, we like to say. And we refer to it as our neighborhood because of the physical proximity, the shared values and culture, and also the shared economic and security concerns.
This is more from Admiral Halsey, now retired Admiral Halsey, talking about cooperation. Let's play it.
What do you think are the most important concerns that we actually are dealing with, or your particular Southcom are dealing with today?
So thanks for that question as well. So first of all, I'd like to share that Southcom has been building partnerships in this region now for close to 60 years. And if you were to look at our mission statement, 2 things that really stand out. Rapidly responding to crises and then building partner capacity, regional capacity. So how do we do that? We do it through security cooperation. Security cooperation is a way that we engage with our partners by and large. Now, how do we do that? It goes back to the fact of foreign military sales, foreign military financing, security assistance, funding as well. And so by doing that, we're able to engage and build partner capacity. That's very important as you look at different threats in the region. So as we assist partners in developing that military capability, what that does for us, and at the same time, we stick with them. We don't just go away. We got to be on the field and engage, right? So we assist them with training, the necessary training to do the sustainment and maintenance. And by doing that, and again, on the field, engage with our partners, building that trust, we're able to enable them to counter that malign activity. And so that's kind of the main focus right now, security cooperation.
I just found this moment to be particularly interesting. Again, this is from 2023 in light of what's happening right now. And even though the individual hosting this panel said, what do you think things will look like in 5 years? I feel like we've lived dog years already under this Trump regime. Watch the response here by Admiral Halsey in response. Let's play it.
Thinking forward, we're here 5 years from now. What do you think, what do you hope to be able to say? Or what do you think will be the new challenges then, Admiral?
I'll share with you that our vision of this Western Hemisphere is a secure, free, and prosperous environment. I think we have to continue to provide security cooperation, build those relationships. One of the key things we do is this international military education and training, where we bring partners, nations over to mid-level and service, senior service colleges, and we forge in those relationships. Some of those folks go back and become chiefs of defense, senior admirals and generals in the militaries. We have to make sure we continue to reach out and look for those like-minded countries or like-minded democracies and build those relationships.
So there you have it, folks. I mean, you don't get much higher than 4-star admiral in charge of the command of that very region where the war crimes are taking place. Again, big news. I think we all know why he's retiring, why he's quitting. And you saw what Hegseth said as well there in that speech. So let me know what you think. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 6 million.
Love this video?
New this morning, the military commander overseeing the Pentagon's escalating attacks on boats off Venezuela's coast, that he is retiring. This is barely a year into his role, his time in that role. And one source tells CNN that tensions had been simmering for weeks between Admiral Alvin Halsey and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and that Hegseth did not believe the admiral was moving aggressively enough to take on and target alleged drug traffickers in the Caribbean. There have been at least 6 U.S. strikes on boats, alleged drug boats.
The admiral knew they was full of shit and gonna get a lot of people locked up for war crimes, and did the honorable thing without losing his pension, and decided to retire. And he's a goddamn hero. And everybody else who continue this absolutely is going to be convicted of war crimes. Trump going to have to give all these people pardons for what they're doing. And it's already lawyers and international scholars talking about that.
In the Caribbean, the latest one disclosed just yesterday, some of the crew on board that boat are believed to have survived that strike. Also this week, President Trump confirmed that he is now authorizing the CIA to operate covertly inside of Venezuela, linked to all of this. But he did stop short of saying that the intent is regime change. Venezuela's president disagrees.
Hamas never before had any previous government, since the CIA has existed, publicly said that it was sending the CIA to kill, to overthrow, and to destroy countries.
Joining me right now is CNN senior military analyst, retired Admiral James Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander. It's great to see you, Admiral. In addition to being former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, you also spent years with U.S. Southern Command, years working on issues related to this region and Venezuela included specifically. On that Admiral retiring, what do you make of it?
Very strange. Hard to come up with an analog. Closest I can come up with maybe 20 years ago, another admiral, Admiral Fox Fallon, stepped down from a role at U.S. Central Command because of disagreements with the administration about how to approach Iran. But extremely rare to see a combatant commander, particularly in the middle of military operations, walk away from the job. Kate, I'd say three things could be at play here. Number one, he may have personal medical issues, family issues. He doesn't want to share them, but now is the right time for him to step away. Number two, we've seen Secretary Hegseth push out a lot of senior military leaders, including the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the former chief of naval operations. Perhaps he's been pushed out of the role, but in a less public way. And third and finally, the speculation I'm hearing is that he disagreed with the policy choices. And in that scenario, as a senior military officer, you essentially have the choice of executing the mission you're given or putting your stars on the table. Perhaps he did the latter. I don't know.
Yeah, but important and impactful nonetheless. This week also, Admiral, we learned that the president, as I mentioned just a moment ago, he authorized the CIA to conduct covert operations inside Venezuela. He also said that he's considering carrying out land operations on the country. Everyone seems to agree, for good reason. Cracking down on drug trafficking is a good thing. But what happens if he moves in, like he is suggesting?
Let's start with the forces that are on station right now. They are significant. There are 6 to 8 big warships down there, a couple of thousand Marines and sailors, dozens of those Tomahawk missiles that Vladimir Putin rightfully is quite worried about. And oh, by the way, a squadron or two of F-35 Lightnings, the 5th generation fighters based out of Puerto Rico. That's a lot of firepower, Kate. It's more than you need,
Puerto
frankly,
Rico
to
is
blow up
acting like
boats.
peasants
So
in the U.S.
He is clearly sending a signal to Maduro for him to speak publicly about the CIA being involved is, again, highly unusual. And I think ultimately the goal here is, in fact, regime change. Final thought, that may be a right policy, but boy, it's gone sideways for us in Latin America, going back to the Bay of Pigs and John F. Kennedy. I'd say flashing yellow light.
And I would say it's always good advice to take the advice of Admiral James Stavridis. It's very good to see you, Admiral. Thank you so much.
Family members of a young man from Trinidad and Tobago says he was killed in a recent U.S. military attack on a boat in the Caribbean this week. The family says 26-year-old Chad Joseph was a simple fisherman. He went to Venezuela 6 months ago to find better work.
See, this young man right here was no narco trafficker exporting drugs to the U.S. Simply trying to make some money to get some money back to his people in Trinidad. And he was executed. They said he was a trafficker. No way was he trafficking no drugs to the U.S. And his family want answers on why he was murdered by Trump.
Because he had relatives there, the family claims he died in a strike on Tuesday. Joseph's cousin, Afisha Clement, spoke out about her pain.
Donald Trump take a father, a brother, an uncle, and nephew from families. Donald Trump don't care what he doing. He just targeting one thing in Venezuela. And he's saying it's drug cartels. It's not that. It's not that. Donald Trump, you need to stop your shit and stop killing innocent people.
U.S. President Donald Trump has ordered U.S. troops to the Southern Caribbean to fight drug trafficking. They have since hit at least 6 boats they claim were involved in illegal drugs. So far, these attacks have killed at least 27 people but no evidence of involvement in the drugs trade has been shared. The Trump administration has given little info about these strikes, no names of the dead, or details on what was on the boats.
Why, if you see a boat have narcotics on it, where's the narcotics? We want evidence, we want proof. There is nothing. The other day, they intercept a boat with 4 men on it. Why they take off the men and them and shoot up the boat after?
Joseph's mom, Lenore Burnley, said no one from Trinidad's government has reached out to her.
Nobody come and tell us nothing. All we're seeing is social media, people coming to put it out there. No police, nobody.
A U.S. official told Reuters that a strike on Thursday was the first with survivors. Legal experts question why the military, not the Coast Guard, is conducting these deadly operations. They also ask why the U.S. doesn't try to stop the boats without killing people. Democrats in Congress say the White House hasn't given good reasons or spy info to explain the actions. The Trump administration argues it is fighting Venezuelan narco-terrorists, making the strikes legitimate. Trump also confirmed on Wednesday that he authorized the CIA to conduct covert operations in Venezuela. This ramps up U.S. pressure on leader Nicolas Maduro, whom the U.S. blames for drug ties and criminal gangs. Maduro denies it all and says the U.S. wants him out of power. On Thursday, Venezuela asked the United Nations Security Council to rule these U.S. boat attacks illegal.
Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, has been firing military lawyers, and experts, including former military officials, believe that this is a clear indication that Pete Hegseth wants to do some legally dubious things in the very near future. And, not ironically, Donald Trump decided to announce shortly after this story broke that he was considering authorizing some very illegal military activities. But before we get into that, let me tell you what Pete Hegseth is doing. He is, of course, getting rid of some of the top brass military lawyers, the top of the top, based on advice from people like libs of TikTok. Let me read you this from Raw Story. Hegseth fired Lieutenant General Joe Berger, the Army's top uniformed lawyer, early this year on the advice of the right-wing social media account Libs of TikTok. And he then removed the Air Force's Judge Advocate General, Lieutenant General Charles Plummer, describing both as, quote, roadblocks to orders that are given by Commander-in-Chief. In other words, Trump wants to do illegal things. These lawyers were saying, hey, you can't do it, so we have to fire them. The people whose job it is to tell us if we're about to do something illegal, let's just remove them, because then suddenly, what? That makes it all legal? That is the most asinine logic I've ever seen. A former senior defense official said, quote, I see this as part of a grander plan to remove lawyers from the military's operational forces and get them out of the way. Decapitating those organizations was an easy way for Hegseth to send a strong message from the outset and put the entire JAG Corps on notice that effectively, if you don't do everything Donald Trump says, you're going to lose your job. If you tell us what he is telling us to do is illegal, you're going to lose your job. And, as I mentioned, shortly after this report came out this week, Donald Trump announced some very seriously illegal military actions. He was asked by a reporter about the, boat bombings. We're allegedly bombing the cartel boats. Reporter asked him, what's the next step in this war on cartels? And are you considering options? Are you considering strikes on land? Trump said, well, I don't want to tell you exactly, but we are certainly looking at land now because we've got the sea very well under control. We've had a couple of days where there isn't a boat to be found, and that I view that as a good thing, not a bad thing. But we had tremendous amounts coming in by boats, by very expensive boats. Okay, first of all, if we even need to believe what you're saying, which we shouldn't, like, why do you even act like they were expensive boats? The people paid a lot of money for them. Some of the boats were still being paid off. They had loans on the boats. They had a boat loan. I didn't need a boat loan when I bought a boat. Like, what? Can we seriously address the fact that this man has dementia? Seriously. But again, he's not done talking about, invading the land of Venezuela. They have a lot of money, very fast, very expensive boats that were pretty big. God almighty, he's a toddler. He's like a toddler. They're big boats and it costs lots of money. And the way you look at it is every boat that we knock out, we save 25,000 American lives. So every time you see a boat and you feel badly, you say, well, that's rough. It is rough. But if you lose 3 people and save 25,000 people, these are people that are killing our population. And again, there is zero evidence that any of these boats were even carrying drugs. The administration has not released a single thing to show that they knew these were drug smuggling boats. These could have been like, Venezuelan celebrities out on their yachts, for all we know. But are you considering a land invasion? A land invasion is, of course, an act of war. An act of war has to be declared by Congress, not by the President of the United States, unless, of course, you've fired all the military lawyers like Pete Hegseth is doing, and then there's nobody to stand in your way. So that's the shot and the chaser, folks. Hegseth is clearing the field of all the military lawyers so that Donald Trump can officially be a dictator. Thanks.
Going to go back to Tulsi. The United States should stay out of Venezuela. We don't want other countries choosing our leaders. We shouldn't be choosing theirs. Guess what? New development in the Venezuela. Trump administration authorizes covert CIA action in Venezuela. So now the CIA, they're the good guys always. So he's doing what every president has done. He's overthrowing countries so we could steal their natural resources and install a puppet. He's doing what they all do. Donald Trump, the peace president, already bombed Yemen, already bombed Iran, already still funding Ukraine, still funding a genocide in Israel, Gaza. Turns the other way every time Israel commits war crimes. This development comes as the U.S. military is drawing up options for President Trump to consider, including possible strikes inside Venezuela. So that's the CIA. You know what they do. They go in, they find a group of people, they arm them, they give them money, and they tell them go overthrow the government. That's what the CIA does.
All the groups here, all the stupid groups here. You don't think the CIA was behind almost all of them?
Right.
Or if they weren't, they infiltrated them and took them over because they did. Remember Patty Hearst and the Symbionese liberation? Yeah.
And as if this hasn't already been happening. Right? I mean, nothing ruins a secret operation like officially authorizing it. The Trump administration has secretly authorized the CIA to conduct covert action in Venezuela. The authorization is the latest step in the Trump administration's. By the way, let's say it says here, stepping up his campaign against Nicolas Maduro, the country's authoritarian leader. Well, let's say he is an authoritarian. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, what business is it of ours how Venezuela governs themselves? It isn't our business. And we don't give a shit about authoritarian rulers. We're in bed with 90% of them across the world. We're in bed with Saudi Arabia, for F's sake.
We're friends with the UK.
We're friends with the UK or locking up people for social media posts.
Authoritarian. We forced an experimental gene therapy on people.
That's right. We forced it. That's right.
What a fucking joke.
American officials have been clear privately that the end goal is to drive Maduro from power. That's what this is all about. The new authority would allow the CIA to carry out lethal operations in Venezuela and conduct a range of operations in the Caribbean. So it's imperialism again. It's John McCain again. The agency would be able to take covert action against Maduro or his government, either unilaterally or in conjunction with the larger military operation. I think it's funny that they have to pretend that Trump has to authorize this, as if they haven't already been doing exactly this.
Yeah, what? Like, is this a joke?
So this authorization will finally allow the CIA to do what they've already been doing for years.
It just means they can pin it on Trump. You know, here's what presidential authorization's worth. Your name is the one that if it goes wrong, I guess it could fall on you.
Yeah.
Because they just are going to do what they're going to do.
That's
Let's
right.
face that fact.
It is not known, Kurt, whether the CIA is planning any operations in Venezuela or if the authorities are meant as a contingency. No, they're already doing it.
Before you even had this article, I knew they were going to do that. They've been doing it for how long now?
For 20 years. They've been
Great
doing
job,
it
guys,
for
by the way. You're really
they've been
doing
doing it for 25 years at least that I know of.
It works so well that Maduro keeps getting reelected.
But this development comes as the U.S. military is planning its own possible escalation, drawing up options for President Trump to consider, including strikes inside Venezuela. So we're just going to go and attack another country that's not attacking us, that poses no threat to us. We're just going to go and do it and install a puppet and steal their natural resources. By the way, impoverishing their whole country.
Well, it's the only way we could win because we haven't won a war in 80 years, as you know. But sometimes the CIA can hop on the bandwagon of dissatisfied citizens and push like a revolution.
Right. So there are currently 10,000 U.S. troops there, most of them at bases in Puerto Rico, but also a contingent of Marines on amphibious assault ships.
Oh, I would never play Saudi Arabia because they're bad. I would never do Riyadh Comedy Festival because they have blood money. But here in America, where I live, I can continue to do shows, Jimmy.
Yeah. In all, the Navy has 8 surface warships and a submarine in the Caribbean. The new authorities, known in intelligence jargon as a presidential finding, were described by multiple U.S. officials who spoke on the contingency of anonymity. Blah, blah, blah. Who gives a... Mr. Trump ordered an end to diplomatic talks with the Maduro government this month as he grew frustrated with the Venezuelan leaders' failure to accede to U.S. demands to give up power voluntarily. So those aren't negotiate. Hey, you guys, you either give up your country over to us, or we're going to kill you.
I'm getting
That's
frustrated.
my negotiation. I'll give you my offer now, Senator. Nothing.
You're not even doing what I said. I'm frustrated. Quit your job as the duly elected president of people who probably like you even more because of my shitty plans that don't work out. They probably are more on your side than they would have been. And I'm frustrated.
I'm frustrated. The CIA has long had authority to work with governments in Latin America on security matters and intelligence sharing. That has allowed the agency to work with Mexican officials to target drug cartels. But those, I mean, the ones that they're running, that the CIA are running, those drug cartels. But
I hope they're authorized to run their own drug cartels.
But those authorizations do not allow the agency to carry out direct lethal operations. The Trump administration strategy on Venezuela, developed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, with help from John Radcliffe, the CIA director, aims to oust Mr. Maduro from power. Mr. Radcliffe has said little about what his agency is doing in Venezuela, but he has promised that the CIA under his leadership would become more aggressive.
Oh, that was their big problem, Jimmy.
And it's about time. It's about time the CIA got aggressive. We don't need no secret agents. We need in-your-face operations like frat boys on a Saturday night throwing haymakers when they aren't throwing up.
Hey, let's start doing MK Ultra again openly instead of secretly.
During the confirmation hearing, Mr. Radcliffe, the head of the CIA, said he would make the CIA less adverse to risk and more willing to conduct covert action when ordered by the president, going places no one else can go and doing things no one else can do.
Because they're illegal?
That's right. The United States has offered $50 million for information leading to Maduro's arrest and conviction on U.S. drug trafficking charges. Don't they already have the info? So you guys don't have any evidence? You need more? And you're going to overthrow his government anyway without any of the... You don't have any evidence or information, but you're going to overthrow his government and murder and slaughter fishing boats?
Well, alleged drug dealers.
Yeah. Mr. Rubio, who also serves as Trump's national security advisor, has called Mr. Maduro illegitimate.
Is he?
And the Trump administration describes him as a narco-terrorist.
Like when we don't run?
Mr. Maduro blocked the government that was democratically elected last year from taking power. This is the New York Times. By the way, they're on board with what Trump is doing. Do you see that they're on board? So when Trump is doing imperialism and overthrowing other countries for bullshit reasons, the mainstream press is all for him. Just like they said when Trump finally bombed Syria, they said, "Oh, Trump became president tonight" on CNN. Remember that?
Freed Zakaria. I appeared
That's
on
right.
Larry Wilmore show with him.
The administration has asserted, but the Trump administration's accusations that he's profited from narcotics trade and his country is a major producer of drugs for the United States has been debated. You know why? Because it's not true. The administration has asserted in legal filings that Mr. Maduro controls a criminal gang, Tren de Aragua, but an assessment by U.S. intelligence agencies contradicts him.
Hey, that's our gang we made.
That's right. While the U.S. military operations, like the strikes against boats purportedly carrying drugs from Venezuela territory, are generally made public, CIA covert actions are typically kept secret. Some, however, like the CIA operation in which Navy SEALs killed Osama bin Laden in 2011, are quickly made public. Hey,
because that was a lie.
What number SEAL team are we up to now? It's hard to keep track.
Well, 666.
The agency has been stepping up its work on counter narcotics for years.
Don't like the competition. And that's why the problem is being solved so well, because of how they've stepped up their work.
Because how they stopped, yeah. Gina Haspel, Mr. Trump's second CIA director during his first administration, devoted more resources to drug hunting in Mexico and Latin America. Oh, really? Under William J. Burns, the Biden administration's director of the CIA, began flying drones over Mexico hunting for fentanyl labs. The covert finding is in some ways a natural evolution of those anti-drug. If you think the CIA is fighting drugs, I've got a vaccine I'd like to sell you.
Everyone's been under mass surveillance for how many years now?
Mass surveillance, at least since 9/11.
But somehow this darn fentanyl just keeps getting in. But we got all these drones and satellites and stuff. And and by the way, the guy has to live in Russia now because, and they've gone back to spying on everybody 1,000 times over. But somehow this all got through because the CIA wasn't taking enough risks.
That's right. So, but here's what the New York Times says. The CIA's history of covert action in the Latin America and the Caribbean is mixed at best. Oh, really? It's mixed?
There's some wins, but also some not so good things, Jimmy. Oh, my God.
In 1954, the agency orchestrated a coup that overthrew President Jacobo Arbenez of Guatemala, ushering in decades of instability, which is exactly what the CIA wants. The CIA-backed Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba in 1961 ended in a disaster, and the agency repeatedly tried to assassinate Fidel Castro, like 160 times. That same year, however, the CIA supplied weapons to dissidents who assassinated Rafael Leonidas Trujillo Molina, the authoritarian leader of the Dominican Republic.
Wait, authoritarian. I don't know what the hell that's supposed to mean.
What is that supposed to mean when you're assassinating government leaders? What do you call that?
I mean, when you keep talking about the post-World War II rules-based order, that sounds very authoritarian.
The agency also had its hands in the 1964 coup in Brazil, the death of Che Guevara, and other machinations in Bolivia, a 1973 coup in Chile, and the Contra fight against the leftist Sandinista government of Nicaragua in the 1980s. And the real reason they killed Che Guevara is to go for the real money by taking over the extremely lucrative Che Guevara t-shirt business.
Do you know what authoritarianism means, by the way?
What does it mean?
Use of strong central power to preserve the political status quo.
And so I just want to show you, this map shows the U.S.-sponsored regime changes and military invasions in Latin America since World War II. It's everywhere.
It's mixed at best.
It's everywhere. Grenada, Venezuela, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, Peru, Panama, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic.
And all the problems now they're complaining about, I just would like to point out, happened after this delightful map of mixed results.
This is the good results. So every place except 1, 2, 3, 4 places in Latin and South America.
And by the way, I bet we did them too.
I bet we did.
The whole map. If intervention was so good, why does it suck now?
Let's remember what Tulsi Gabbard said. Tulsi Gabbard said the United States needs to stay out of Venezuela. Let the Venezuelan people determine their future. We don't want other countries to choose our leaders, so we have to stop trying to choose theirs. She said that in 2019. That was before she was working for Trump.
Well, I can't wait for the kicker of. Well, that's
But
before
now she's all on board for it. Now she's all on. She was always against regime change wars. She was against Trump doing this when in his first term, and now she's part of his cabinet. Now she's all for it.
Yeah, what a bunch of heroes, all going along with the program.
Here's Tulsi Gabbard from 2019. You want to hear? This is from 2019.
I am a soldier in the Army National Guard. I've served now for nearly 15 years, served on 2 Middle East deployments, and I know personally firsthand the cost of war. In Congress now for over the last 6 years, I've served on the Foreign Affairs Committee as well as the Armed Services Committee, and I have seen how self-serving, powerful politicians from both parties have continued this foreign policy regime change war view where they think that we, the United States, should be acting as the policemen of the world, and that we should continue to go around and overthrowing and toppling dictators or countries who we don't like, costing us, the American people, trillions of dollars in the process, causing more suffering in the countries where we go and wage these wars, and, oh, by the way, undermining our own national security, as we are seeing playing out before our eyes in countries like North Korea.
Yes.
Where Kim Jong-un has clearly stated that he is holding on to these nuclear weapons as his only deterrent against the United States coming in and waging a regime change war in North Korea. So while, I'm deeply concerned about the fact that this summit yesterday ended without an agreement, because we need to see denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, it's not surprising because of this policy, this regime change war policy that, again, leaders in both parties in the foreign policy establishment here in Washington have perpetuated over and over and over again.
What's so interesting is that worldview, the regime change worldview, I mean, if it worked, at one time I thought it sounded like it made sense, but we've had almost 20 years of it, and it demonstrably hasn't worked. And there's really kind of no debate about how badly it's gone. Why would people still support that?
That's a great question. It's, if you look at the military industrial complex that benefits off of these continued regime change wars, you look at those in Washington who's have invested their entire careers built on continuing to wage these wars. And the most unfortunate thing is they sell them under the guise of humanitarianism to the American people who want to be able to do good things.
Well, hopefully she's still saying those things inside the administration, inside the White House. I would love to think so.
I mean, she's not saying them out loud now, is she?
So hopefully she's working behind the scenes to stop this garbage, but it doesn't look like it. And it looks like she's going to go along with this administration doing this stuff, even after she said that in 2019.
Why is there any behind the scenes if we have a democracy, by the way? Why is it you got to hope that when they go 180 degrees of the thing they just said a year or two ago, you got to hope that, well, they got to play the game and just try. Is that a real country I live in where that's your best case scenario? This is worthless, dude. This country's worthless.
I'm just going to go back to Tulsi. The United States should stay out of Venezuela. We don't want other countries choosing our leaders. We shouldn't be choosing theirs.
I got to screen cap that so I could tweet it at her.
Obviously understands how they're going to get into power, which is having the United States do it for them. That's why here's Politico October 10th, right, when the Nobel Prize was given to the opposition leader. The first thing she did was dedicated it to Donald Trump in order to thank him for his, quote, decisive support. I mean, I guess you can believe it's a coincidence that the Nobel Peace Prize was given right to the opposition leader of Venezuela, the person we want to install as president of Venezuela at the exact moment that we're ready to do so. And yes, you can make the argument. I haven't studied enough to know, but I'm sure there's a good argument for it. I don't know for sure. I'm willing to assume it's true that the election in Venezuela was the byproduct of fraud, that Maduro didn't really win, that the opposition won. But what is that the business of the United States? We can go all over I can show you half the world where there aren't free and fair elections held, where there are elections held and they're manipulated, they're distorted, the opposition is banned from running. I can show you Ukraine or Egypt or Saudi Arabia, all over the world. If that, are we the enforcer now of free and fair elections? Is that really what anyone thinks the United States is interested in? Obviously, long before there was that election in Venezuela, we were trying to install the chosen leader of that country. You may recall that both Republicans and Democrats united to affirm this utterly preposterous delusion that someone named Juan Guaido was actually the president of Venezuela, and we treated him as the president of Venezuela, not the Republican Party, not the Democratic Party, just all of Washington. And half of Europe decided that the real president of Venezuela, even though no one ever voted for him in Venezuela for that, even though he didn't actually run anything, was someone named Juan Guaido. Here in the first Trump administration, 2020, February 20th, 2020, Trump gave his State of the Union speech to a joint House of Congress. There you see Mike Pence, his then Vice President, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, sitting behind him, where he welcomed the legitimate and sole sovereign and president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido, and watch how both parties responded.
The United States is leading a 59-nation diplomatic coalition against the socialist dictator of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. Maduro is an illegitimate ruler, a tyrant who brutalizes his people, but Maduro's grip on tyranny will be smashed and broken. Here this evening is a very brave man who carries with him the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of all Venezuelans. Joining us in the gallery is the true and legitimate president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido. Mr. President, please take this message back to you.
And there you see every single member of the House virtually giving a standing ovation to the true president of Venezuela, who carries the hopes and dreams of the Venezuelan people with him. Juan Guaido, there's Vice President Pence and Speaker Pelosi on their feet for the true president of Venezuela. Juan Guaido, both Republicans and Democrats standing and cheering him. So there's been a long-term mission of the United States government. It's just that we had other wars we had to go fight first, so we didn't really get around to Venezuela. Now we have time. The war in Gaza's over. Sort of, maybe. Probably not, but for a while at least. So we have this like interval where we don't want to get bored. We want to make sure we have a new war to entertain us, to keep the weapons flowing. Here is Marco Rubio. This is when he was a member of the Senate in 2019. And he went to Twitter in Spanish, which I don't know if he would be allowed under the rules of MAGA to speak in Spanish now. But back then, anyway, he had no concern about proving that he was from that region, that was a region of personal concern to him. And he wrote, "We support the group of military personnel who rebel against Maduro and subordinate themselves to Juan Guaido." So he was saying that's who we support, is the part of the military who accepts Juan Guaido as their president. Here is Rubio in 2019. He has a picture there of just reminding people of exactly the historical precedent, which is Panama. He has a picture there of Manuel Noriega free, being defiant, and then a picture of him in Miami, where the U.S. military was sent to get him. Marco Rubio is very, very interested in Latin America, where he's from. And here we have Marco Rubio as well, threatening regime change. There's Muammar Gaddafi free, and then there's Muammar Gaddafi being raped to death as a result of U.S. intervention, something that Marco Rubio considers something to celebrate. These are the people who are in charge of foreign policy. They're pure neocons. Marco Rubio, I know we're supposed to believe he's reformed or he's under Trump's thumb and he's more anti-interventionist or whatever. I mean, I don't know what else I can show you. Here is NBC News in 2022. And this is John Bolton talking about his time in the White House. He's probably going to be indicted and arrested within the next few days, John Bolton is. But here is based on accusations that he leaked classified information. But here's NBC News. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton admits to planning foreign coups. Pressed about his involvement, Bolton cited an unsuccessful attempt to oust Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro during the first Trump administration. So there was an effort, as I indicated before, and when it failed, that was what led to Bolton's ouster. Politico this week has a report on how Trump has a different plan to oust Maduro this time around. Quote, the first time President Trump tried to push Maduro out of power, he wasn't coy about it. He accused the Venezuelan dictator of stealing an election, stripped U.S. recognition from Maduro's government, imposed sanctions on Caracas, and rallied other countries to pressure Maduro to quit. Didn't work. In his second term, Trump is targeting Maduro differently. He has said, quote, we're not talking about regime change in Caracas. Instead, he's emphasizing the longstanding accusation that the strongman is a drug lord and a dangerous criminal. The plan, people familiar with the situation say, is to force Maduro out as part of Trump's ongoing fight against drug cartels. The campaign may not formally be about regime change, but if the pressure from the anti-cartel moves happen to topple Maduro, well, the president and his team would be delighted. Quote, would everyone like Maduro to go? Yes, a Trump administration official said. We're going to put a lot of pressure on him. He's weak. It's quite possible he'll fall from this pressure alone without having to do anything more directly. Here's Marco Rubio on Fox. This was just this week, in case you have any doubt about what their real intentions are and who is behind it. I just think it's so bizarre. You have a movement calling itself America First, and then you have in charge of foreign policy, Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, somebody whose family came from Cuba and who has spent his whole life focused on the place that he comes from. He wants the United States to go reform and fix the countries that are in the region that his family comes from. Here's Rubio.
The United States has long, for many, many years, established intelligence that allow us to interdict and stop drug boats. And we did that. And it doesn't work. Interdiction doesn't work because these drug cartels, what they do is they know they're going to lose, 2% of their cargo. They bake it into their economics. What will stop them is when you blow them up, when you get rid of them. The President of the United States is going to wage war on narco-terrorist organizations. This one was operating in international waters, headed towards the United States to flood our country with poison. And under President Trump, those days are over.
And it wasn't a one-off. Rubio says strikes like these will happen again.
Now, the justification, as I said, is that this is a drug gang and therefore he's a narco-terrorist. And that's why these war on terror authorities are being utilized in order to justify this. But I just want to point to one thing we've shown you before, the reports about where drugs are coming from. And only a small portion originate from Venezuela, if at all. But this was all being discussed, as we showed you in 2019, 2020, when the Trump administration wanted to do it. There was a person who was leading the way in warning about the dangers of regime change in Venezuela. She was vehemently opposed. Her name is Tulsi Gabbard. She's now the Trump administration's director of national intelligence. And in May of 2019, she went to Twitter and she posted this, quote, throughout history, every time the U.S. topples a foreign country's dictator or government, the outcome has been disastrous. Civil war, military intervention in Venezuela will wreak death and destruction to Venezuelan people and increase tensions that threaten our national security. She then went on Fox News to expand on her argument, and here's part of what she said.
Here now exclusively, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, a combat veteran and 2020 Democratic presidential candidate. What's your reaction to that? You heard Kellyanne Conway, counselor to the president there.
What we are hearing is an increased saber-rattling intention saying the United States needs to send in the U.S. military now to wage yet another wasteful, counterproductive regime change war. And once again, it's being done under the guise of humanitarianism. When we look throughout history, every time the United States goes into another country and topples a dictator or topples a government, the outcome has been disastrous for the people in these countries. That's why we should use our leadership in the world to try to broker a diplomatic solution, working with countries like Russia that have great influence over Venezuela, so that there is a peaceful outcome. Because I can tell you as a soldier, Martha, I've seen firsthand the high cost of war, and pushing for this civil war, pushing for the use of military force will only end up with more suffering and death and disaster for the Venezuelan people. What to speak of increasing these tensions that threaten our own national security. Anytime we're in this situation where you have tensions being ratcheted up and this conflict being pushed closer and closer between nuclear armed countries like the United States and countries like Russia and China, this is something that poses an existential threat to the American people.
I mean, all of those arguments still apply with equal force. And obviously, Tulsi Gabbard received a lot of support and applause for making those kind of arguments, not just with respect to Venezuela, but to all sorts of countries for a very long time. And yet, for whatever reason, every time there's a new war, a new regime change war that's on the table and that's packaged, people are ready to cheer for it. It's sort of like people say, yeah, I'm really sick of these regime change war operations. I'm sick of endless war. We need to stop meddling in these other countries. We need to stop fighting all these wars, and we need to spend our money instead on improving our communities here at home. And then every time there's a new war, someone says, oh no, but not this one. This one's like the real one. No, we have, of course have to go fight in Ukraine. No, of course we have to support Israel, our close ally. No, of course we have to get rid of Maduro. This is a really bad guy. He's like a drug trafficker, kingpin, or whatever. People support the abstract principle vehemently, but then every time there's a new propaganda package handed, the government and their media allies know exactly how to package it to get just enough people to support it. One of the ways that it happens, I think it is such an important thing to realize, because you're going to see this all the time now, you're already seeing it, is that in pretty much every country in the world, you can find people in the country who would want the United States to come and invade their country and change their regime. Why wouldn't they? The United States is an extremely powerful country. If you don't like the government and you can't get rid of it, and the United States wants to come and change the government that you dislike, yeah, of course, you're going to be in favor of it. You can find people in countries, not just in those countries, but people who are from the countries who left, or exiles or dissidents or whatever, especially. You can always find people who are going to cheer U.S. support who are going to cheer U.S. intervention. In the build up to the Iraq War, I remember they had all these Iraqi exiles. And if you would say, hey, I don't think the U.S. should go and invade Iraq and overthrow Saddam, they would come and they would say, how dare you? You have no idea how evil this dictator is. How can you be pro-Saddam? And they would try and shame you, like, oh, we're from Iraq, and we're telling you this is a terrible guy who deserves to be deposed, which, okay, maybe he does. But Americans still have the right to say, I don't want my government going around the world invading other countries and changing the regime. And then they just unleash these people who are from that country, who are from the region, who come and say, who are you to oppose the freedom for the Iraqi people? What are you, pro-Saddam? That's disgusting. And same thing now with the people who want regime change in Iran. You say you don't want the United States or any other country destabilizing Iran, changing the regime. There are all these Iranian exiles who will get unleashed on you saying, I'm from Iran. You have no idea the evils of the mullah. We want the Shah back. You're pro-mullah. You want to keep the Iranian people suppressed. Same thing in Syria. You had all these Syrians saying, how dare you oppose the dirty war that Obama unleashed the CIA to fight to get rid of Assad? Assad is a uniquely evil person. You're pro-Assad. We want to free the Syrian people. How dare you stand in the way? Obviously, same in Libya. And now you have tons of people who are from the region, like the Marco Rubios of the world, who are living in Florida, who came to the United States, or whose parents are immigrants from Venezuela or Cuba. And the minute anyone stands up and questions, why are we changing the government of Venezuela? Why is that our role? Why should the American worker continuously have to spend all of American resources to change governments from countries that don't have anything to do with us? You're going to see tons of people from the region, Latin Americans, Venezuelans, come try and shame you. What are you, pro-Maduro? I'll just give you one example. So earlier today, I started, trying to make the argument that, well, especially once this New York Times story came out, and I tried to say, like, the argument, quote, we have to go to war to change the regime in Venezuela because Maduro has weapons of mass destruction is actually a more convincing one than saying we have to go to war to change the regime in Venezuela because that's where the drugs are coming from that are drowning American communities. Because, as I said, the evidence is overwhelming that drugs don't come from Venezuela. That's every U.S. government report. And so I'm an American citizen. I'm saying I don't think we should be spending our money to go and change the government of Venezuela. I'm questioning the pretext for it, which I have every right to do. And then someone named Emmanuel Risson, who's with a bunch of groups associated with Venezuela and regime change in Latin America, needless to say, it's like the Ahmad Chalabi Iraqi exile or the Iranian exiles who want the Shah back, comes and says, let's just let the narco-terrorist Maduro, who stole Venezuela's elections, killing thousands of Americans every year and sending criminals and terrorists to the U.S., right, Glenn? And then here's somebody named Orlando Avendano, same exact origin, same exact thing, same exact orientation, cares about Latin America, wants the U.S. to go. So, Glenn, are you really going to now side with the narco-terrorists? Maduro isn't just a dictator. He runs the largest drug trafficking cartel in the Western Hemisphere and is a major source of regional destabilization throughout terrorist activity. His cartel moves more than 20% of the world's cocaine and is responsible for the death of thousands of Americans every year. He has also enabled the spread of organized crime groups like Tren de Agua, which murders dissidents and civilians beyond Venezuela's border. The U.S. feels it firsthand, but so do countries like Chile and Colombia. On top of that, Maduro has allowed Islamic terrorist groups to plan attacks from inside Venezuela and to move freely across the hemisphere. All of that is happening just a few hundred miles. Why not just say that he has weapons of mass destruction? Honestly, I feel like it would just be shorter. It'd be easier. We have already that framework in our head. Somehow we've managed to survive as a country. I really don't know how. For all these decades, with having Hugo Chavez and the Nicolas Maduro in power in Venezuela, somehow we've managed to survive with having the Castros and the communist government run Cuba. Who knows how we survived as a country allowing that? So now you're going to hear every single carousel of evil, every single major economic and social problem in the United States blamed on Nicolas Maduro as though that's the source of American problem. And if you're somebody who's concerned about the consequences of it, of constantly being on a posture of endless war, consuming more resources to go do war in Venezuela, to change the government, who knows what kind of instability that will engender in the region. We never know the outcome. As Tulsi Gabbard said, every time we go and change the regime in another country, we produce disaster, not just for ourselves, but for the people of that country and that region. Anyone raising those questions, you're now going to be pro-Maduro. You're going to be in favor of a drug trafficker, in favor of a narco-terrorist. It's the same tactics every time. Don't fall for them. And don't be intimidated by these accusations. They really don't have any force anymore, or they shouldn't. They're worn out. These are neocon tactics. And I'm sure Trump is relying on Marco Rubio. It doesn't make Trump exonerated from blame. I'm just saying that I'm sure the prime driver behind this is Marco Rubio. And the reason is because he comes from that region. He represents a lot of people who want those governments changed, not because it benefits the United States, but because it benefits those countries that they continue to maintain a great deal of interest in and loyalty to, because that's where they come from. All right, let me ask you something. How much time do you spend every day on a web?
Huge. Like, this is regime change for real.
Yeah.
Whether it comes violently or coerced, it's still scary. And then you own it 100%. The fact that Rubio has posted photos of Maduro next to Gaddafi. I mean, This is scary. Now, I don't think it's deniable. From the military operations to the bounty to this authorizing CIA action against Venezuela.
Breaking Points just revealed the truth about CIA regime change efforts in Venezuela as the Trump administration and the State Department openly floats the idea of deposing President Maduro by force in a manner that, let's just say, is indistinguishable from the Bush administration neocons. What does this mean? Will this regime change happen? Let's get a look. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
All right, shall we get to Venezuela?
Yes.
Sticking in terms of international affairs, huge news yesterday. I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts about this. Right now, the Trump administration is basically publicly telegraphing what we did to Saddam. We're like, hey, Maduro, you got to go. And we are building up a military campaign. We're striking drug traffickers right off the coast of Venezuela. We have a $50 million bounty on Maduro's head. Trump now bragging in the Oval Office. We are looking at land strikes directly inside of Venezuela. Let's take a listen.
The next step in this war on cartels, and are you considering options? Are you considering strikes on land?
Well, I don't want to tell you exactly, but we are certainly looking at land now because we've got the sea very well under control. We've had a couple of days where there isn't a boat to be found. And that I view that as a good thing, not a bad thing. But we had tremendous amounts coming in by boats, by very expensive boats. You know, they have a lot of money, very fast, very expensive boats that were pretty big. And the way you look at it is every boat that we knock out, we save 25,000 American lives. So every time you see a boat and you feel badly, you say, wow, that's rough. It is rough. But if you lose 3 people and save 25,000 people, these are people that are killing our population.
So
no, the Venezuelan government's not killing our population. This is absolutely maddening and retarded, to say the least. And tell me, if you're a Trump supporter still now, how is this distinguishable in any way from Bush-era neocons and the propaganda campaign that was unleashed upon the American public to support 20-plus year occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan? I don't see it. Boasting about possible land strikes when he campaigned not to start new wars. Well, that already happened in Iran, and we haven't heard the last of that one, by the way. He exacerbated wars in both Syria and Yemen in his first term, and did the same against Yemen in this term back in March when he bombed Yemen continuously for about a month. He continues to aid Ukraine. This is really, indescribable that his base can't hold this kind of stuff against him when he behaves the same way as, say, if you put Paul Wolfowitz in the presidency, how he would act going to war with all of these powers and flirting regime change with another one as Americans languish, as we're 37 trillion in debt. It's absurd.
He says there, we're looking at, he won't rule out any of the land strikes. But the reason why it pairs very importantly is with this story. Let's put it up here on the screen from the New York Times. Quote, the Trump administration has authorized covert CIA action in Venezuela. It says they have secretly authorized the CIA to conduct action against Nicolas Maduro specifically. So keep that in mind, not against so-called drug trafficking. They're saying against the Maduro government specifically. They say that he has acknowledged, in fact, that we are, quote, looking at land now because we've got the sea very well under control, considering strikes on Venezuelan territory. This new authority allows the CIA to carry out lethal operations in Venezuela and conduct a range of operations in the Caribbean. The agency would be able to take covert action against Maduro or his government, either unilaterally or in conjunction with a larger military operation. It is not yet known whether the CIA is planning any specific operations, but the development comes as the U.S. military is planning its own possible explanation. So one of the immediate analyses I saw of this is that if you look at the way this all works, is this could be some sort of limited hangout thing to get in the New York Times, specifically to make, because it's the front page story. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe they just get it as a leak. I'm a little bit suspicious. I tend to think all of this is about a public pressure campaign to try to get him to step down voluntarily. Because it's one of those where, look, the CIA is scary, especially Latin America, right? We have a long legacy of trying to do stuff down there. You have the military campaign, you have the boats, you have the president not ruling it out. It seems to me that this was supposed to be I'm not excusing it, by the way, because I still think it's completely insane. And of course, you could still follow through with it. It seems to me, or on the immediate term, that it was leaked intentionally to try to ramp up the pressure. Regardless, though, this is a great gift to Maduro, in my opinion, because
Yeah, we'll hear what he says about that. But what is casting doubt in my eyes of this theory pertaining to this is that the White House threw millions of dollars at Juan Guaido, a rival of Maduro's, in 2019 to try to depose the president there. They meant business there, and that attracted a lot of attention at the time. It made major news, and many prominent members within the government were saying, hey, don't follow these Mike Pompeo and John Bolton and what they want in terms of regime change here. We know that the U.S. threw actual money at a potential scheme to do that in 2019. So why would they be behaving less bellicose now than then? That doesn't really make sense to me. You still have neocons in power and the head of the State Department and the head of other places. So I don't understand that.
Because now what can he do? Every time that there's an opposition leader, CIA. If somebody tries to attack you, CIA. Just kill him, right? And the people will say, look at these people. They're meddling in our government. Of course, they're trying to kill me. They're trying to overthrow me. This is like the Latin American strongman argument for the last 50 years down there. It's like, oh, it's always CIA or somebody. Sometimes it is. But in this case, what he's doing is actually making it so that Maduro can blame all of Venezuela's problems on the United States.
That's exactly what sanctions do as well. That's what the sanctions regime against Russia does. That's what the sanctions regime against Iran does. It allows these governments to pin all of the blame on all of the maladies that their populace is experiencing, even if it's their doing that their populace is suffering, shifting that blame to the United States. That's what sanctions do. That's what calls for regime change does. That's what CIA pressure and CIA propaganda campaigns do. They're always counterintuitive, and they're always part of this stupid empire building scheme that never works out to the benefit of Americans. I think he's exactly right there.
Which he's been doing for the last decade. But even more importantly, I think here is the Syria, like from day one, I was like, I'm very scared. This looks regime change. And even Juan David Rojas, we had on, he was like, oh, I don't know. It's like, could be just be like stupidity, right? In terms of it's striking the drug boats. Now, I don't think it's deniable. From the military operations to the bounty to this authorizing CIA action against Venezuela, the fact that Marco Rubio and Miller are running the White House and the Pentagon, right? So keep in mind, Rubio has somehow convinced Trump that this Venezuela thing is connected to drugs. There's not a scrap of evidence of that. It's complete bullshit. Literally bullshit.
It is total bunk. And this is a combination by the neocons of the war on terror with the drug war, both of which are utterly failed wars on abstract ideas that, again, never worked to the benefit of the Americans. Give those wars to drugs and terrorism, respectively, because the United States has endless problems because of them, in terms of debt, in terms of stupid entangling alliances that attract new enemies throughout the whole course of my life, through inflation with the central bank financing this, through the printing of new money, through the curtailment of our civil liberties, shredding the Fourth Amendment, expanding the surveillance state, imposing the TSA, creating the Department of Homeland Security, enacting the Patriot Act. All this nonsense comes from these absurd ideas. And we're still letting it pass because, it's this new administration that says it isn't neocon, even though Marco Rubio is still running the show. I'm sorry, this is nonsense.
To DEA statistics, because especially in all the interviews, they mention fentanyl. There's 0% fentanyl comes from Venezuela, again, according to the DEA. Now, if you look at what's really going on here, it could be about oil. It could be about a particular South Florida constituency, which has backed Rubio his entire life and political career. The fact that Rubio has posted photos of Maduro next to Gaddafi. I mean, this is scary because this could create a chaotic political vacuum. Even if he did step down voluntarily, what is going to come next, right? What's going to happen then? And then we're going to march down in there and we're going to back some government. Like the Juan Guaido situation was humiliating. It was a disaster.
And I don't want to.
Yeah, he's pointing to that 2019 attempt for the U.S. to fund regime change in Venezuela there. So let's just let that be a precursor and precedent to pay attention here when you think that, hey, maybe Trump's just applying pressure. Like, I just don't see it. I think that he wants regime change there.
hear jack shit about migration from any fool who is supporting any of this. Creating
honestly,
a failed state, going in and creating a failed state. What do you think that is going to happen there? How is that going to work? How did it work out with Syria? How did that go for Europe? How did that go for the Syrian people? So, I have been trying to wrap my head like you around why. Marco Rubio, that makes sense. I think it's both ideological and it's in his political interest. These are his political backers. He's trying to deliver for them. He has long been in love with the idea of regime change in Venezuela. But for Trump, was he really convinced of this bullshit drug trafficking thing? Is it about oil? It's so insane to me. And then the other part that is crazy to me is it doesn't seem like they really feel the need to message this to the American people. I know they talk about fentanyl and they talk about the drugs, but there hasn't been a major propaganda campaign to really get people on board with the idea of some sort of large scale, covert, and they're talking about direct military options.
I just don't think they could get away with it after all the funding to Israel and all the funding to Ukraine. Americans are generally sick of this nonsense. You ask people who support that, they're generally connected to the arms makers and, the most vile neocons among us, some in the liberal establishment that still believe it's fighting for democracy. What does it say if you're trying to drum up propaganda for a new regime change? But I do agree with these two that it's probably, the impulses and motivations are somewhere in a Venn diagram between, Rubio's backing from anti-communists in Florida and his political rise on the basis of, messaging to that faction, the ability to potentially extract oil, but that's costly as it is. And, that wasn't exactly working out for the American economy when the war in Iraq was done under those reasons, according to many. So I just think this whole thing's disastrous. No matter what you say about it, there's no justification for it.
Regime change in Venezuela. So the whole thing is wild. And I think it's part of why people have struggled to take it seriously. The media doesn't cover it nearly as much.
No, they don't. They really don't.
As it should, because it just seems like such an insane, bizarre thing to do. And yet here we continue week by week to track how now they're blowing up these boats. Now they put a bounty on his head. Now they're claiming that he runs this drug trafficking network. Now they're saying that drug traffickers are terrorists and you can just take military action against them willy-nilly. Now here we are greenlighting the CIA. Now here we are developing military options. Now we've massed, they say in the New York Times, they say the scale of the military buildup in the region is substantial. Currently 10,000 troops there, most of them at bases in Puerto Rico, but also contingent of Marines on amphibious assault ships. In all, the Navy has 8 surface warships and a submarine in the Caribbean. So all of the pieces are there, and you have an administration with, characters like Marco Rubio, who is one of the most powerful people in the government at this point, who's been handed all sorts of responsibility, who are dyed-in-the-wool, neocons, have wanted this regime change forever. So I don't know, at a certain point, you got to take them really seriously that they actually intend it.
Yeah, I agree. Have taken it seriously from the beginning. It's genuinely terrifying, and it actually does fit exactly with what you're saying. Actually, I'll skip ahead here in some of our elements because they're important just to show you how it fits. Put the last one up here, please, D5, up on the screen. This was a very recent visit from the top U.S. Admiral to the Caribbean, actually, amid all these Venezuela tensions. When you start to see the high level, generals, the admirals, and others start to make little trips down there, for what purpose? They've tried to describe it as routine, but you have this huge naval buildup. Also, keep in mind what Trump even said in that statement. Remember, he was like, we have the sea under control. Now we need the land. So
yeah, this is just intelligence gathering, a pressure campaign to precede a potential regime change, and we can't take anything else from it than that. Why would you even, back a cause that does that, moves incredible amounts of U.S. naval resources into that region? That alone is costly. We found that out during the Iran war, the 12-day war, as they call it, too. All for nothing, all for throwing away the chance to normalize relations with Iran, forsaking American principles and a real America first attitude for the purpose of Israel. This is doing the same thing, but allocating resources into the Caribbean and paying immense amounts of money when, again, we're on $37 trillion into debt because of these kind of stuff. these kind of things stuff.
Oh, he's basically describing it as taking
Insane.
setting it up for some sort of naval blockade, or nobody really even knows. Like, here we had the Navy Admiral. He met with Antigua, with Barbuda, Grenada, and others at the U.S. Embassy, apparently in Barbados, some of the Caribbean nations, which I'm assuming are near the naval flotilla that we have out there. But the point remains, like, you have 2 visits apparently just already to Southcom, like where it's Latin America, U.S. forces. You have the military buildup. You have the strikes, which are happening. And then you have the CIA. I mean, you have to put it all together. I agree with you on the media stuff. I mean, if I go to, we'll give the New York Times credit because they broke the story. It was their front page, and it's a great story. But I mean, if I turn on MSNBC or something like that, what's the lead story going to be? Like, this is huge.
Yeah.
This is huge.
Yeah, they're not talking about this whatsoever. That's easy to see. And that's why, again, another example of why so many Americans have turned against the media. Not that this is the hottest pressing issue for a lot of Americans that care about, say, the economy and inflation and debt and economic struggles. You know, Israel's in the news right now. Ukraine is to some extent. You know, spending certainly always is. But this is a real issue that, you know, the neocon policy is being resurrected under this Trump administration. That campaign, let's just say, quite to the contrary of that. Remember, Trump actually spent like his last week just trying to destroy and wreck Liz Cheney, who was campaigning then with Kamala Harris. It's just so absurd, right? And he said, well, maybe Liz Cheney would be against some of these wars, against some of these regime change efforts if she was serving on the front. And what does Trump do? He flirts with regime change, you know, in several different places. Even in Iran, he put that on the table in a Truth Social post. And by the way, if Iran didn't respond as it did, I think he would have unfurled a propaganda campaign for U.S. boots on the ground and regime change there. That's what Netanyahu still wants. He's still going to talk about that. But now we're doing it with Venezuela, too. And just take a look at this. This is from 2019, where the U.S. funded Juan Guaido, who was challenging President Maduro at that time, saying that Maduro's 2018 election was illegitimate. And hey, I'm invoking a clause in the Constitution that says that. And he tried to install himself as the real president of Venezuela. This was backed by the United States. So I'm sorry, I don't buy that this is just some empty pressure campaign against Venezuela now. I think they really do want regime change now. And then you had this man whose company, Silver Core USA, actually launched an effort to back Guaido and the anti-communist forces in 2020. Now, the federal government denies funding his operation in any regard, but Goudreau claimed at one point that the U.S. government did give him funding for this. I haven't followed that to the bottom of the rabbit hole, but that's a conflict too. You know, there's some evidence that the U.S. government wanted to fund his expedition in 2020 there. But here's the most interesting one. One member of the Trump administration was particularly adamant against the idea of Venezuelan regime change in 2019. And she has been conspicuously silent. And you might ask why. Well, let's listen to her back from a video in 2019 and see what her take was on it.
What we are hearing is an increased saber-rattling intention saying the United States needs to send in the U.S. military now to wage yet another wasteful, counterproductive regime change war. And once again, it's being done under the guise of humanitarianism. If this administration is so concerned about the well-being of the Venezuelan people, as we all are, then they should be using their influence and power to try to bring the different sides together towards some reconciliation.
Well, wouldn't they say that that's exactly what they've been trying to do? We heard from Secretary Pompeo and from the president that they are hoping for a peaceful resolution here. But you have Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, saying that our interference is a grave violation of international law. So do you agree with him?
The problem is that you hear people like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo saying that they're hoping for a diplomatic solution, while at the same time basically using the threat of U.S. military force. That does not set the stage for diplomacy. That simply ratchets up the tensions. The United
That's exactly right. And what does it say about this administration when the neocons under the first administration, John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, were actually more open to letting diplomacy work its course while still planning regime change. Obviously, we know that. We just went through those articles. But what does it say when the messaging is more neocon now than it was in 2019 when, Trump was misled by all of his advisors? And that's an excuse a lot of Trump fans always use. He's misled by his advisors. I have no doubt that, because his advisors have been so bad, the people he puts around him, which ultimately is on him, by the way, are so bad that that's the reason Trump is so bad. Well, I'm sorry, Trump has to have some culpability too. And when your current administration under Marco Rubio is acting like a more ardent neocon than Pompeo and Bolton were in 2019, that's pretty telling. And it's pretty telling that Tulsi Gabbard seems exactly silent about this. I get it. She's in a role of analyzing intelligence, but it sure seems like her influence has been pushed out of this one. That's for sure. But what do you think? Do you guys agree with me? Let me know down below. Is Sagar right? Is this regime change, or is it just a pressure campaign?
Honestly, I wouldn't want to be in Donald Trump's shoes. The fact is that, against the backdrop of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and the growing trade war, Donald Trump may go down in history as the only U.S. president, under whose rule Washington will finally lose its leading position in the global economic arena. Observing the actions of the United States in the economic war against Russia and China, as well as Washington's actions regarding the Ukrainian conflict, it becomes clear that American specialists, developing a strategy for the White House, are poorly and ineptly coping with their duties. Indeed, following the USSR's collapse, U.S. foreign policy declined to such an extent that Washington eventually lost skilled strategists, capable of properly evaluating Russia and China's actions, predicting geopolitical developments accurately, and safeguarding the U.S. from strategic errors on the global stage. It was precisely because of the erroneous forecasts of American strategists and the incorrect assessment of Russia's capabilities that the United States completely failed the project called Ukraine and allowed Moscow to launch the process of eliminating the unipolar world. Furthermore, it was precisely because of the unprofessional actions of American strategists that the collective West's positions began to weaken rapidly in the global economic arena. And now, Donald Trump, having actually declared an economic war, has also begun to repeat the mistakes of his predecessors. And all thanks to the stupid and unprofessional forecasts of the so-called American strategists. For example, it has already become clear that Donald Trump underestimated China's willingness to endure economic difficulties. Everything that is happening indicates that, unlike the Trump administration, Xi Jinping and his team are ready to go all the way, and will never capitulate in the trade war against the United States. Moreover, Trump's strategic mistakes prove that, unlike China, the United States is not ready for a long-term trade war. For example, in April of this year, Trump succumbed to financial market pressure when the risk of stock market collapse skyrocketed and forced the 47th President of the United States to cancel tariff increases a week after the threats. This indicates that the United States continues to suffer from a shortage of professional and experienced strategists. As a result, the White House continues to make strategic mistakes and even fall into traps designed for Washington's opponents. By the way, this problem of the United States became particularly noticeable after February 2022. It looks like the US government has forgotten the proverb, curses, like chickens, come home to roost. On that basis, it could be construed that this is why the United States fell into the trap, that Washington was preparing for Russia and China. What kind of Washington's trap are we talking about? The fact is that a serious economic crisis has begun in the United States, which the American authorities have been trying to contain for a long time. The American authorities have come up with a good scheme to get out of this economic crisis at the expense of other countries. The American plan is to cut off Europe from Russian gas, while not forgetting to declare the green agenda and, at the same time, implement more anti-Russian sanctions. According to the American plan, Europe will be forced to buy liquefied natural gas from the United States at very high prices, which will lead to the enrichment of Washington, the bankruptcy of European industry, and the ruin of Russia. Americans believe that without a strong Russia, China is very vulnerable. The United States is confident that it will be easier to destroy the Chinese economy, since China doesn't have such rich natural resources as Russia, and therefore it will be enough to simply remove China from foreign technology, resource imports, logistics, and the American market. However, as we can see, things didn't quite go according to the American plan. It was not possible to cut off Russia from the European market. Moreover, thanks to the actions of the United States, Russia is enriched by selling gas at prices 6 times higher than they were before. Russia has also transferred payments to rubles, so that the money would not settle in reserves, but would actually flow into the Russian economy and develop it. All this led to the fact that the Russian economy not only didn't weaken, but even strengthened, due to the acquired immunity against Western sanctions. Having failed with gas, the United States decided to switch to oil, and began to call on everyone to abandon Russian oil. However, even here, things didn't go according to the US plan. The fact is that it is even more difficult for Europe to refuse Russian oil than Russian gas. All these decades, Europe has been building its refineries only for Russian oil, and therefore, oil from other countries is simply not suitable for the European market. Moreover, most US refineries are also suitable only for Russian oil, and using other grades of oil from other countries can lead to fires at these refineries. Thus, the United States and Europe have put themselves in a rather stupid position. On the one hand, they publicly refused Russian oil, but at the same time, they continue to buy Russian oil in huge quantities. And in order not to look stupid in the eyes of their citizens, the US and European governments say they don't violate sanctions, and don't buy anything from Russia. Here I would like to clarify. Formally, the United States and Europe don't violate sanctions, and don't buy oil from Russia. However, they continue buying Russian oil through an intermediary. The intermediary raises the price by raising the interest rate, and part of this interest rate, which the intermediary pays to Russia, compensates for the sanctions discount. As a result, Europeans and Americans still buy Russian oil, but at a higher price. In this situation, only Russia and its intermediary win. China can do the same. It has an influence over many oil-producing countries, as well as has a close friendship with Russia, and long-term contracts for oil supplies. When due to Western actions, the price of a barrel of oil rises to $200, China can also capitalize on that, by selling excess oil from storage facilities at inflated prices through its intermediary. And all this means that China and Russia will continue to receive huge profits despite the sanctions. Moreover, with such a high price of oil, the production of many goods becomes unprofitable in the West. The United States understands that high oil prices are a big threat to the weakened American economy, and has long been trying to reduce them. The United States simply begged the oil-producing countries to increase oil production, which would lead to lower oil prices. However, the oil-producing countries refused to do it. They simply stopped obeying the United States. Saudi Arabia even stopped answering phone calls from Washington, making it clear that the Saudis now have new patrons, China and Russia. The whole situation will eventually lead to the fact that within 10 to 15 years, the goods produced in Russia and China will cost much less than goods produced in the United States and Europe. People will massively refuse expensive Western goods. European and American production will stop. People will be forced to go to Russia to work, in order to earn money, to pay their gas bills. Unfortunately, many will no longer be able to afford to buy a car, as gasoline prices in the West will be catastrophically high. Electric cars will also not be able to save the situation, as electricity prices will also rise catastrophically. Thus, as you can see, the adventure launched by Western globalists, called Project Ukraine, designed to destroy Russia and prevent China and the countries of the global south from finally gaining strength in economic terms, has completely failed. And this fact increases the risks of starting a global war, since Western globalists are not ready and do not want to admit defeat. Well, my friends, let's hope that Vladimir Putin's wisdom and self-control will allow humanity to avoid the outbreak of World War III.
It didn't start in the ports. It started in the banks. Overnight, China switched its trade settlements out of the dollar. In less than 12 hours, $42 billion in US-bound payments disappeared from the global clearing system. American importers woke up to empty ledgers, ships mid-route with no cleared invoices, and lenders refusing credit. Washington called it technical disruption. Beijing called it normalization. Everyone else called it what it was, the moment the world stopped waiting on the US dollar. 3 weeks earlier, Washington introduced a sweeping maritime tariff, a $3 billion levy targeting ships built, owned, or operated by Chinese firms. According to Bloomberg data from October 2025, the measure aimed to reduce Beijing's control over global shipping by penalizing its vessels in U.S. waters. Yet within 48 hours, the plan backfired spectacularly. Because Chinese shipbuilders dominate the industry, owning or constructing nearly 45% of the world's cargo fleet, the tariff didn't just strike China. It crippled supply lines that touch nearly every American importer. Reuters reports that by the end of September, total U.S. container imports had fallen 8.4% year-on-year, with shipments from China plunging almost 23%. West Coast ports, the arteries of America's trade with Asia, took the hardest hit. Los Angeles and Long Beach saw Chinese imports collapse 31.6% in a single month. Warehouse space that was once scarce now echoes with emptiness. The new rule meant every Chinese-linked vessel required additional documentation, insurance clearance, and verification checks, a bureaucratic maze that turned a one-day turnaround into a week-long delay. Inside the White House, officials argued the slowdown was temporary, but the markets told another story. Freight rates between Shanghai and Los Angeles dropped 14% in a single week as carriers began to reroute. Bloomberg Intelligence noted that 1/3 of vessels serving U.S. ports were suddenly ineligible for entry without paying extraordinary fees. The shock rippled across global insurance markets, pushing maritime coverage costs up 28%. China didn't retaliate publicly. It pivoted. Instead of contesting Washington's move at the WTO, Beijing quietly ordered its shipping conglomerates to divert cargo to alternative destinations. Within days, container routes were redrawn. Goods once bound for California began docking in Rotterdam, Felixstowe, and Piraeus. Reuters tracking data shows Chinese exports to the European Union surged 12%, while exports to the US fell nearly 9%. Britain's port of Felixstowe reported a 30% spike in container traffic, the sharpest increase in its history. This shift wasn't improvisation, it was execution. For years, Beijing had built redundant port access through its Belt and Road Initiative in Greece, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Kenya, enabling trade rerouting in real time. When the U.S. raised barriers, China opened side doors. By October, shipping monitors recorded 117 blank sailings, canceled routes, between China and the U.S., representing nearly 10% of total trans-Pacific capacity. The damage at home became visible fast. The Port of Los Angeles lost more than 1/3 of its scheduled arrivals. Long Beach terminals cut shifts. According to the Pacific Maritime Association, nearly 15,000 longshore jobs are now at risk. Those aren't numbers on a spreadsheet. They are paychecks in limbo. Each vessel that skips an American port leaves behind empty shifts for truckers, dispatchers, and warehouse clerks. The ripple effect extends far inland, into grocery prices, factory inventories, and retail shelves. Economically, the blow struck deeper than anticipated. The Wall Street Journal reports that large U.S. importers, from electronics to furniture, now face transit delays of 4 to 6 weeks. Many are resorting to air freight at up to 7 times the cost to maintain inventory. For small businesses, the math no longer works. Margins vanish before goods even reach the docks. Then came Beijing's second move. On October 10th, China's Ministry of Commerce announced new export licensing for lithium battery components and rare earth materials. These are just critical inputs for electric vehicles, smartphones, and defense systems. Reuters confirmed the controls will take effect November 8th, effectively throttling supply to any nation seen as hostile to stable trade. Overnight, shares in U.S. EV manufacturers slid 9%. The Financial Times described it as supply chain retaliation through precision leverage. Let's pause, because this wasn't supposed to happen. The tariffs were designed as pressure, not provocation. But by targeting China's maritime dominance, Washington struck the one sector where Beijing holds irreplaceable leverage. According to the Wilson Center, China's shipyards produce over 40% of global commercial tonnage, compared to barely 1% for the United States. Beijing can replace lost routes faster than America can build new ships. Meanwhile, Chinese state-backed logistics systems, including the Logink digital platform, coordinate real-time data across dozens of partner ports in Asia and Europe. This gives Beijing visibility over global cargo flows, an advantage Washington can neither access nor disrupt. As a result, when the U.S. moved, China already knew how to reroute the board. Back in Washington, Treasury officials faced an uncomfortable realization tariff revenue was climbing, but cargo wasn't. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, import volumes from China dropped 27% in August alone, contributing to a $21 billion contraction in trade activity. That contraction translated directly into lost tax revenue, slower retail turnover, and declining port fees. America's attempt to weaken China's shipping empire instead weakened its own logistics backbone. The Financial Times highlighted another irony. The beneficiaries of the chaos weren't American manufacturers, but European intermediaries. As goods bypassed U.S. ports, European logistics firms signed new long-term contracts with Chinese exporters. Lloyd's List reports that the Port of Rotterdam has reached record capacity, handling 4.3 million TEUs last quarter, a 19% increase over 2024. In global trade, every blockade becomes an opportunity for someone else. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, typically supportive of tariff enforcement, issued an unusually sharp statement on October 12th, warning that policy-induced inefficiencies are eroding supply resilience faster than adversarial pressure. That's diplomatic language for self-inflicted damage. In China, the contrast is striking. Manufacturing output rose 8.3% in August 2025, even as United States-bound exports fell 27%. The void was filled by Southeast Asia and Latin America. Exports to ASEAN nations jumped 15.6%, to Latin America 15%, to Africa a staggering 56%. Beijing's diversification strategy, once theoretical, is now functioning policy. Economist Zhang Yanxing, an advisor to China's National Development and Reform Commission, told Reuters that every United States restriction becomes a new corridor for us to open. It isn't rhetoric, it's logistics math. Inside the United States, that math looks brutal. A study by the Descartes data mine shows East and Gulf Coast ports now handle 44.5% of total container imports, up from 38% in April, a migration driven by West Coast paralysis. Yet even these gains mask a deeper weakness. The United States doesn't have enough ships, dock workers, or inland rail flexibility to absorb diverted traffic. Containers pile up in Savannah, Norfolk, and Houston with nowhere to go. Bloomberg Economics estimates that port congestion is shaving roughly 0.4% off quarterly GDP growth. For an economy already grappling with inflation and rate pressure, that's a direct hit. Yet even amid crisis, there's calculation. Airbus is expanding its Alabama plant while simultaneously increasing assembly capacity in Tianjin. By producing on both sides of the tariff wall, it avoids penalties and secures market access. It's a case study in adaptive capitalism, playing both superpowers at once. The pattern exposes a deeper split inside the West itself. While Washington hardens its trade stance, European governments are quietly integrating with China's redirected flows. French, German, and Italian firms are ramping up orders through Belt and Road logistics hubs. The Wall Street Journal notes that European Union importers have replaced roughly 18% of their United States sourcing with direct Chinese contracts since midsummer. The transatlantic economic alliance that once stood united on trade strategy is starting to diverge. This fragmentation is not ideological, it's structural. Europe depends on physical access to goods. America is relying on enforcement to reshape them. One prioritizes flow, the other control. The question is which approach sustains prosperity longer. Meanwhile, the human cost grows. In Long Beach, shift supervisors describe a surreal calm. Cranes idle, coffee shops empty, parking lots half full. A dock worker tells Bloomberg he's working 2 days a week instead of 6. These are skilled union jobs with average annual wages above $90,000. Their loss radiates outward. Fewer shifts mean fewer deliveries, less spending, and more local businesses folding. At the same time, trucking firms that once serviced ports are going bankrupt. The American Trucking Associations estimate over 8,000 independent operators have suspended operations since August. Diesel demand on the West Coast is down 11%. Economic damage is spreading beyond coastal boundaries into the heartland. The United States government faces a policy paradox. To sustain port jobs, it must attract ships. To attract ships, it must ease tariffs. To ease tariffs, it risks appearing weak. Each option triggers its own backlash. The trade war has become a logistics war, and wars of logistics are never won quickly. According to IMF trade models released in September, a prolonged dual tariff environment could slice 0.8% off United States GDP growth by mid-2026 while boosting China's share of global exports to 17%, its highest ever. Those numbers challenge the assumption that economic confrontation equals dominance. Sometimes resilience looks like retreat. Behind closed doors, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is reportedly pushing for a recalibration, not a reversal, but a strategic pause. Sources quoted by the Financial Times say Bessent argues that industrial renewal cannot begin while maritime throughput collapses. The statement isn't ideological, it's mathematical. No volume, no growth. But momentum is hard to stop once it's political. The administration's tariff policy polls well domestically, framed as defending American industry against Chinese manipulation. Yet beneath the rhetoric lies the logistical contradiction. Without functioning ports, no protectionist measure can achieve its intent. The deeper question is structural. America's dependence on foreign-built ships, nearly 99% of commercial tonnage, leaves it strategically vulnerable. The Wilson Center warns that, Washington's maritime blind spot is as much about shipyards as it is about sovereignty. The last major U.S. shipyard capable of large-scale container production closed decades ago. And even if Congress allocated funds tomorrow, rebuilding that capacity would take years. The global system, meanwhile, is adjusting around that gap. Freight analytics from Queen plus Nagel show that while total United States imports in early 2025 rose 3.6%, Chinese origin cargo fell 5%, replaced by intermediary exports from Vietnam and Malaysia, countries whose own inputs still rely on Chinese materials. Decoupling, it seems, is occurring more in labeling than in substance. The implications stretch beyond trade. When Chinese port data shifts to European terminals, it alters currency flows, energy routes, and shipping insurance networks. It's not merely cargo moving, it's influence. So what happens next? Models by the Complexity Science Hub in Vienna predict that if the United States suspends tariffs for 90 days, inbound shipping could surge 150% as backlogged vessels flood the system. Long Beach would face a 73% spike in arrivals, Oakland 61%, Tacoma 56%. That rebound, while temporary, could break ports already stretched thin. Relief and overload now mean the same thing. And if tariffs continue, the bleed persists. Slower, quieter, but equally destructive. The geopolitical balance is shifting in real time. China is turning constraint into leverage. Europe is turning opportunity into partnership. And the United States is learning the cost of unilateral power in an interdependent world. The docks remain silent tonight. The cranes are still. The Pacific horizon glows faintly under sodium light. A mirror of economic ambition meeting logistical paralysis. And in that stillness, a single question lingers. When the world's cargo no longer needs to dock in America, what does American power weigh?
The United States cannot get rare earth products from China, the U.S. national defense industry need to grind to a halt.
That's what suddenly made the U.S. realize that you guys, you need our rare earths. If you want to create these weapons, you need a rare earth.
So when true masters make their move, they move quietly. And this time, the whole world heard China's chokehold.
China just pulled the plug on America's war machine. Every F-35, 900 pounds of Chinese rare earths. Every destroyer, 5,200 pounds. Submarines, missiles, radar, all dependent on materials Beijing controls. Now China's cut off the Pentagon. No more exports to foreign defense users. The result? America's military-industrial complex just got checkmated. Let's get into it.
Some country would smuggle rare earth, fly it to a port to be exported to the United States. No way, it's not going to save the United States. China, for many years, had no problem in exporting rare earth products to the United States or to many other countries. But now the United States has been wielding this tariff and sanctions against China again and again and again. If the United States cannot get rare earth products from China, the U.S. national defense industry need to grind to a halt.
That's why they criticize China. You are weaponizing the supply chain. So that's why we want to have the de-risk. We need to have offshore supply chains, and we need to have more allies to have the rare earth production.
Be my guest. Why? Because rare earth is not rare to start with. It will take minimum 25 years for the United States to reach the level of real commercial production of rare earth.
Victor Gao just laid out the brutal math. He's not wrong about the 25-year timeline. The Center for Strategic and International Studies confirms that the U.S. is 100% import reliant for 12 critical minerals. When he says the U.S. national defense industry would grind to a halt, he's being literal. China represented 70% of U.S. rare earth imports in 2023. You can't just smuggle your way out of this dependency when you need industrial scale processing. Here's the thing. The Pentagon's total rare earth demand is only 0.1% of global production. It's not about volume. It's about the chokehold. China doesn't need to cut off the world. They just need to cut off the Pentagon. Mission accomplished. Now here's some comments from you guys from the last video. No rare earth, no chips made. No rare earth, no weapons made. No war globally. Peace on earth. Hallelujah. China should not, must not export rare earths to the US to save lives. No more killing humanity across our planet. China's been around for 5,000 years. America's been around for 250 and already needs a reboot. Well done, China. I applaud you for standing up to the bullies, especially the US. May there be peace on earth with the ban on these rare earths.
China suddenly made the U.S. realize that you guys, you need our rare earths. If you want to create these weapons, you need our rare earths. So if you put the absolute maximum pressure that you can think about, then we control, I think they control 96%, right? Of that sector, which is even more insane. No more exports to you guys. Export controls now from our own. And the US backtracked within a week. Within a week, even Donald Trump, because somebody in the Pentagon must have actually gone to the office and said, like, look, let me show you. Let me show you how important this is and what China is doing right now. And they got the point across. And this is now a very strategic security vulnerability of the US, which I am absolutely certain they are reacting to. You need to refocus on the real economy. Access to these goods, access to the supply chains, or control and management of, like, where is all of this stuff sourced from. In order to produce an F-35, you need millions of parts, you need millions of components, and they all need to be produced.
Thousands of rare earth metals.
And thousands of pounds of rare earth metals.
96% control. Let that number sink in. This isn't market dominance, it's a monopoly with military implications. He mentions the Pentagon finally getting briefed on this vulnerability. Here's what they learned. A single F-35 Lightning II contains over 900 pounds of rare earth elements. An Arleigh Burke destroyer needs 5,200 pounds. Nearly all of it sourced from China. Now, when he says somebody in the Pentagon must have gone to the office to explain this, that somebody was probably having a panic attack. Because China's new export controls, effective December 1st, specifically target foreign defense users. Any military applications will be automatically rejected. The US has been building the world's most expensive military on China's supply chain. It's like handing your enemy the off switch to your entire defense capability. Now let's check out some comments. If the US can ban selling chips to China, then why can't China ban selling rare earths to the US? Okay, it's like this. 10 years ago, when China wanted US advanced chips, US being arrogant and hegemonic says no to China. Today, China does the same thing back to the US. A tit for tat, 10 years in the making. It's time to have a more balanced world rather than controlled by a big bully like USA.
President Trump says the U.S. is imposing an additional 100% tariff on imports from China starting November 1st.
Well. Trump is starting trade war too. He posted on social media saying there was no need to meet with China's president. Then he threatened to impose a 100% tariff on Chinese goods. Trump isn't backing down, even as the stock market begins to collapse under the pressure. In response, China's Ministry of Commerce issued 6 consecutive announcements, each one stronger than the last. Beijing declared export controls on rare earth materials, rare earth technologies, and lithium batteries bound for overseas markets. Soon after, China announced special port fees for all U.S. vessels docking at Chinese ports, a direct countermeasure to Washington's moves. At first, these looked like ordinary bureaucratic documents, but every page rattled the nerves of the global market. Among them, Announcement 61 and Announcement 62 carried the greatest weight. China officially upgraded its rare earth export control system, and this time it's not just about shipping minerals. It's about controlling the entire technological chain. If even 0.1% of your rare earths come from China, you must report it, get approval, and follow Chinese regulations. That's extraterritorial regulation. That's long-arm governance, Chinese style. The United States was caught off guard. Some call it a rare earth nuke, but that's not accurate. A nuke destroys. This move reclaims control. Within just 24 hours after Washington's new sanctions, Beijing responded calmly, quietly, completely. No slogans, no press conferences, just official documents. That's what real power looks like, silent and absolute. This isn't anger, it's maturity, not impulse, but strategy. When true masters make their move, they move quietly. And this time, the whole world heard China's chokehold.
This is what strategic warfare looks like in 2025. 6 consecutive ministry announcements. No press conferences, no drama, just bureaucratic documents that sent shockwaves through global defense contractors. Extraterritorial regulation. Even if 0.1% of your rare earths come from China, you need Beijing's approval. That's not just export control, that's supply chain colonization. China is now regulating what happens to their materials after they leave Chinese soil. The speaker calls it long-arm governance, Chinese style. I call it checkmate. While Trump was threatening 100% tariffs, China was quietly building a regulatory framework that gives them veto power over the entire global defense industry. And notice the timing. This happened 24 hours after Washington's sanctions. China's response wasn't emotional, it was surgical. They've been planning this for years. Okay, here are some comments. Every move USA thinks about, China saw it 1,000 years ago, and they'll lose. I think China's president should be nominated for a Nobel Prize for shutting America down, and more importantly, for pissing Trump off to the max. Respect for China. Down with the USA warmongers.
China just made it much harder for the US to get its hands on rare earths, something the West badly needs to take everything from mobile phones to fighter jets. Beijing is expanding its list of restricted minerals and extending export control to related technologies and their use abroad. Even technical plants and repair guys are now off limits, making it harder for the West to build its own rare earth tech and reduce dependence on China. China produces over 90% of the world's processed rare earth, and this spring placed restrictions on exports to the US in response to Donald Trump's tariff war. And with this latest escalation, for the first time, China has clearly named a target. No exports for foreign defense users. The timing is no coincidence. US lawmakers recently pushed to expand their own ban on chip-making exports to China just ahead of a meeting of Trump and Xi Jinping in South Korea. Now China is showing that two can play at that game.
For the first time, China has clearly named a target. No exports for foreign defense users. This is the money shot. China just drew a red line around the Pentagon and every defense contractor in the West. They're not playing games anymore. The clip mentions China produces over 90% of the world's processed rare earths. But here's what makes this move brilliant. China is using America's own playbook. The US restricted chip exports to China's military. Now China is restricting rare earth exports to America's military. Except there's one crucial difference. The US has alternatives to Chinese chips. China has alternatives to American chips. But there are no alternatives to Chinese rare earth processing. None. Zero. The US has been trying to build domestic capacity since 2020 and has allocated a whopping $439 million. That's pocket change for rebuilding an entire industrial base. China is scaling military production 5 to 6 times faster than the US, according to CSIS. Now they've cut off the materials the US needs to catch up. Game over. Now let's check out some comments. No rare earths, no weapons, no war. The Nobel Peace Prize should be awarded to China. Those Epstein files must be crazy. Why, when America wants to restrict CPU and GPU chips to China, it's okay, but when China wants to restrict rare earths, suddenly China is bad. So there you have it. China didn't just win the trade war. They've systematically dismantled America's military-industrial advantage using the Pentagon's own supply chain against them. This isn't about economics anymore. This is about national security. And the harsh reality is that America's most advanced weapons systems are now hostage to Beijing's export licenses. The Pentagon is scrambling to build a billion-dollar stockpile, but that's like putting a band-aid on a severed artery. It'll take 25 years minimum to rebuild domestic rare earth processing. China knows this. They've been planning this checkmate for decades. What do you think? Is this the end of American military dominance? Or can the Pentagon find a way out of this trap? Drop your thoughts.
Everyone, thank you so much for being here today. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to World Affairs in Context on Substack and Patreon for extra content and join our community. The US-China trade war is literally spiraling out of control. It is getting out of control by the day. With the recent announcement of export restrictions on rare earth minerals, which I discussed here on my channel a couple of days ago in great detail, China effectively said, look, enough is enough. China's move hit Washington where it hurts the most. It pointed to its vulnerability in waging wars, since Chinese rare earth imports account for nearly 78% of the United States military-industrial manufacturing. Rare earth magnets are crucial components in U.S. weapon systems such as F-35 fighter jets and even Tomahawk missiles. China is the leader in processing rare earth minerals, which is key here. Processing is key. The United States is at least a decade and trillions of dollars behind China in this regard. China controls nearly 70% of the world's rare earth mining and 90% of processing. So as you can see, the United States has no cards. Zero cards, as Trump likes to say. I discussed this in great detail in a recent video, and I explained how the export controls impact the United States military-industrial complex. So you're welcome to watch that video next. With the Trump-Xi Jinping meeting coming up in South Korea later this month, Washington is in a panic mode, a full-blown panic mode. And what does it do when it panics? Well, Treasury Secretary Bessent and President Trump have been busy this week doing some domestic damage control, trying to persuade you, the American public, that the United States wants to help China. So both of them said the United States want to help China, but China's not allowing us to help it.
As the president said, we want to help China, not hurt it.
And then they, of course, say that China is the one that refuses to cooperate, even though Washington has been nothing but aggressive toward China in recent months. Bessent said, this is China versus the world. Those are his words. China will get hurt. In reality, it is China versus the West, however, as I'm sure you would agree. And if you know simple geography, the West does not represent the entire world. Now, take a look at the video. This is Scott Bessent explaining what his policy decisions are. Take a look.
If some in the Chinese government want to slow down the global economy through disappointing actions and through economic coercion, the Chinese economy will be hurt the most. And make no mistake, this is China versus the world. They have put these unacceptable export controls on the entire world. China is a command and control economy, and we and our allies will neither be commanded nor controlled. They are a state economy, and we are not going to let a group of bureaucrats in Beijing try to manage the global supply chains. China's actions have once again demonstrated the risk of being dependent on them on rare earths, and for that matter, anything. If China wants to be an unreliable partner to the world, then the world will have to decouple. The world does not want to decouple. We want to de-risk. But signals like this are signs of decoupling, which we don't believe China wants. And again, we do not want to decouple. We should work together to de-risk and diversify our supply chains away from China as quickly as possible.
Bessent pointed to Washington now seeking global backing against China's rare earth export curbs. Scott Bessent expects support from India and European Union. The United States wants to, let's say, decouple the EU from China as a way to solidify its presence on the European market and really to probably show Europe who's boss. Of course, Europe already knows that and everybody sees it. Europe, of course, lacks the independent and sovereign policymakers, with the exception of maybe a couple of states such as Hungary, for example. So getting Europeans on board with shifting away from Chinese exports appears to be an important part in Bessent's message this week. Beijing's new rules, announced on October the 9th, require both Chinese and foreign companies to obtain government approval to export any product that contains more than 0.1% rare earth elements by value. The new curbs also expand the list of restricted minerals and ban exports for foreign military use, which is a smart move. The restrictions would impact every sector of the United States economy, but the defense, semiconductor, and electric vehicle industries would face the brunt. Defense contractors and Apple, Nvidia, Intel, Tesla, Ford, and GM are all highly exposed to this. Beijing said that the export controls are driven by its national security interest and, quote, frequent military conflict. In terms of national security reasoning, this is precisely what the United States quotes when imposing export control restrictions on advanced microchips to China. So when we do it, it's America first policy, but when China does it, it's wrong somehow. It becomes wrong to do that, to serve your own national interests. Well, Bessent went as far as to say that China's move is a sign of weakness. In what world? China just showed a card that Washington can beat. And you don't really need to be pro-China or anti-US to see this. If anything, this is a red flag. This is a wake-up call for Washington. Aggression simply no longer works. The global majority isn't willing to put up with it anymore. Remember, China called on Washington to treat bilateral talks with respect. Months ago, this was a specific request, and clearly Washington wasn't listening. Still, the upcoming meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping will be an interesting one, to say the least. The good thing is that Washington-Beijing lines of communication remain open. Ahead of the South Korea summit, the United States and China, the officials from both sides are actually holding staff-level talks in Washington during the IMF and World Bank meetings this week. And after that, Bessent and He Lifeng, Chinese vice premier, are expected to meet in Asia at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Seoul. So it is clear that Washington desperately needs an off-ramp here. It needs de-escalation because it cannot do without rare earth minerals. It can't wage a war in China when China controls rare earth minerals that are needed for the military-industrial complex in the United States. And so perhaps that's why Washington is resorting to all means possible to escalate, to flex a muscle. Trump has responded to China's move with 100% tariffs on Chinese goods starting on November the 1st. Additionally, recently the Trump administration proposed to ban Chinese airliners from Russian airspace, which remains a key route connecting Asia with Europe and North America. So Definitely a lot is on the table, and I will keep you updated. There's a lot to discuss and many different moving parts. I will start discussing some of these events and their analysis over on my Substack more often, so be sure.
Hello， 大家好，欢迎回到外媒看中国，我是安博人。Apologies for another Donald Trump story, you guys, but the US president is at it again. This time melting down over the fact that his own tariff war has meant China is no longer willing to buy soybeans from the United States. He said online that not buying their crops is an economically hostile act, despite it just being the result of his own tariff war. China stopped buying US soybeans after Beijing was forced to retaliate and tax imports of the beans into China, forcing Chinese buyers to instead source from South America, which offers a more stable and more competitively priced supply. Trump is quickly realizing that his self-proclaimed master tariff plan is only sending the US and its farmers to the poorhouse. Today, we'll go beyond the propaganda and check out all of the juicy details. This is Reports on China. I'm Andy Borham here in Shanghai. Let's get reporting. US President Donald Trump has had another tantrum on social media, this time over China's pivot away from US-grown soybeans, following the trade war he started himself back in April. He's facing massive pressure from US farmers who last year sold more than half of their entire soybean yield to China, 27 million metric tons, for US $12.8 billion, according to US data. But after Trump started his ill-advised and self-harming tariff tantrum in April, China retaliated, adding a matching tax to Chinese buyers importing US soybeans, making the product too expensive. Now China imports the vast majority of its soybeans from South America, with up to 75% coming from Brazil alone, who offer stability and competitive prices, but most of all, no risk of interference from the daily changing whims of President Donald Trump. Seriously, why did no one tell him that markets prefer stability and will shun suppliers whose governments act exactly how he is acting? I ask because it's obvious he still doesn't realize this is all his own doing, as evidenced by his social media rant last night. He wrote, "I believe that China purposefully not buying our soybeans and causing difficulty for our soybean farmers is an economically hostile act. We are considering terminating business with China having to do with cooking oil and other elements of trade as retribution. As an example, we can easily produce cooking oil ourselves. We don't need to purchase it from China." LOL. First of all, China is not purposefully not buying your soybeans, sir. They retaliated to your own tax on Chinese imports by leveraging their own on certain US products. This is 100% your own doing. If you didn't unfairly tax US buyers of Chinese goods starting this April, your soybeans would still be selling into China. Secondly, it's interesting to see how he mentioned US farmers facing difficulties, and that they certainly are. But again, it's no one's fault but Trump's. It's just sad that they have to bear the brunt of the ramifications from his terrible tariff tantrum. Also, Trump mentions buying cooking oil from China. Actually, what he's talking about is the purchase of used cooking oil from China, which is then converted to biofuel in the US. Cutting that off won't harm China by any significant metric, but it will increase the price of biofuel in the United States. Basically, you guys, Trump just cannot win this one, but I'm shocked that he still has not realized that reality and that he's the only one to blame. Like I said in yesterday's video, last month's trade data shows that Chinese exports around the world were the highest they've been in 6 months, despite exports to the US dropping massively. That shows that Trump's tariffs don't hurt China, but they definitely hurt the ordinary American, who's now facing inflation, rising prices, and general signs of a declining economy. Now, for someone who claims to be a master negotiator and a gold star businessman, Trump is absolutely and totally inept when it comes to the global economy and how it works. And it's the ordinary American who's suffering, not the average auntie or uncle on the streets of Beijing or Zhumadian. When will he learn? Well, like I said yesterday, only time will tell. And on that note, that will be all for today, you guys. But as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Being decided in Washington, but in the sprawling tech hubs of Shenzhen and the strategic planning rooms of Beijing. How has a nation once defined by its manufacturing prowess quietly become the master of its own technological destiny, and what does this mean for the world? Friends, thank you for being here today. In the intricate theater of global geopolitics and trade, the rivalry between the United States and China stands as the defining narrative of the 21st century. For years, a tense equilibrium has characterized their relationship, punctuated by periods of cooperation and escalating conflict. However, the dynamics of this relationship have undergone a profound transformation, particularly in the arena of trade negotiations. While Washington has historically dictated the terms of global economic engagement, a new reality has emerged, one in which Beijing increasingly holds the more advantageous position. China has meticulously secured a strategic advantage in trade negotiations by systematically dismantling its economic dependencies, establishing near unassailable dominance in critical global supply chains, and astutely exploiting the political and economic vulnerabilities inherent in the American system. While the nation grapples with significant internal headwinds, from a looming property crisis to structural unemployment, its long-term state-directed strategy of achieving self-reliance and cultivating diverse international markets has endowed it with more leverage and resilience than it possessed in any previous conflict. This shift does not suggest American obsolescence, but rather signals a fundamental rebalancing of global economic power, where China's patient strategic foresight is proving to be a formidable counterweight to America's more reactive and politically fragmented approach. The story of how China gained this upper hand is not one of sudden action, but of a deliberate multi-decade pivot that is now bearing fruit, fundamentally reshaping the rules of international trade and challenging the bedrock of American economic hegemony. The genesis of China's modern strategic pivot can be traced back to the trade war initiated during the first Trump administration, beginning around 2018. This period served as a jarring wake-up call for for the leadership in Beijing. The conflict, characterized by aggressive tariffs and technological sanctions, starkly illuminated the profound risks of China's over-reliance on foreign technology, particularly the sophisticated semiconductors and software originating from the United States. This dependency was no longer a simple economic vulnerability, it was a critical national security threat. The realization dawned that as long as the nation's advanced industries were built upon an American technological foundation, China would remain perpetually susceptible to Washington's political whims and economic coercion. In response, Beijing initiated a monumental state-driven campaign to build a more resilient, self-sufficient, and technologically independent economy. This was not merely a defensive maneuver, but a foundational shift in national strategy aimed at inoculating the country from external pressures and, in the long run, positioning China as a global technological leader in its own right. At the heart of this strategic reorientation was an unprecedented and sustained investment in research and development, R&D. The scale of this financial commitment is staggering and underscores the seriousness of Beijing's ambition. Between the years 2007 and 2023, China's annual R&D spending grew an astonishing six-fold, skyrocketing from approximately 136 billion US dollars to a colossal 781 billion US dollars. By 2023, this figure brought China to near parity with the United States, which spent 823 billion US dollars in the same year. This torrent of capital was strategically channeled into sectors deemed critical for future economic and military power. The results of this investment have been transformative, drastically reducing the nation's import dependency for advanced components across a swath of high-value industries, including aerospace, advanced robotics, complex electronics, and telecommunications. The journey from being a net importer of technological goods when it joined the World Trade Organization to becoming a net exporter represents a remarkable national achievement accomplished in just over 2 decades. This campaign for self-reliance has yielded its most significant successes in the critical arenas of semiconductors and artificial intelligence, AI, two of the most important technologies of the modern era. For years, the U.S. has leveraged its dominance in the semiconductor industry as its most powerful tool of economic statecraft, cutting off Chinese firms from the advanced chips needed to power everything from smartphones to supercomputers. Yet, this strategy appears to have had the unintended consequence of catalyzing China's domestic innovation. Beijing has poured billions into building a homegrown chip industry, and while it still lags behind the absolute cutting edge, it has successfully developed the capacity to produce sophisticated semiconductors without U.S. inputs, particularly for its domestic needs. Chinese technology giants like Huawei, once crippled by American sanctions, have reemerged with publicly stated multi-year plans to compete directly with U.S. industry leaders like NVIDIA. The progress in AI is even more striking. Several years ago, the world's top open source AI models were predominantly American. More recently, a list of the top 5 models were all of Chinese origin. This achievement signifies more than just academic prowess. It reflects a burgeoning ecosystem of innovation that is no longer reliant on American platforms. This has led to what analysts term the splintering of tech stacks, wherein the US and China are developing increasingly separate and independent technological ecosystems. China is comfortable positioning itself to compete globally without any American inputs into its technology infrastructure, a reality that dramatically weakens America's leverage in any tech-centric trade dispute. This technological bifurcation, the so-called splintering of tech stacks, carries implications far beyond corporate competition. It signals the potential end of a unified global digital ecosystem where common standards and interoperable technologies facilitated seamless international commerce and communication. In its place, a digital iron curtain may be descending, creating 2 distinct, often incompatible spheres of influence. One will operate on a Western framework built around American hardware and software principles, while the other will be a Sino-centric ecosystem powered by companies like Huawei, Tencent, and Alibaba, governed by different standards, data privacy norms, and state controls. For nations around the world, this schism will force a difficult choice: which technological sphere to align with. This decision will have profound geopolitical consequences, influencing everything from telecommunications, infrastructure, and financial systems to military interoperability and intelligence sharing. China's success in building a viable, independent tech stack is therefore not just a commercial achievement, it is a foundational element of its strategy to create a multipolar world where American technological supremacy is no longer an uncontested fact. Parallel to its pursuit of technological sovereignty, China has executed a masterful diversification of its trade relationships, methodically reducing its economic reliance on the American market. Recognizing that its dependency on US consumers was a key vulnerability, Beijing has actively worked to de-risk its export-oriented economy. This strategy has been remarkably effective. In 2018, at the height of the first trade war, exports to the United States constituted approximately 20% of China's total exports. By 2024, that figure had deliberately been driven down to less than 15%. This reduction is not the result of a simple market downturn. It is the outcome of a concerted policy to make the Chinese economy less susceptible to the impact of American tariffs and less exposed to the volatility of American politics. By weaning itself off its largest customer, China has blunted one of Washington's most potent economic weapons, thereby enhancing its own staying power in any protracted trade conflict. This de-risking was not merely about exporting less to the US, but about exporting more to everyone else. China has aggressively and successfully cultivated new markets, turning its former weakness into a strategic strength. The most significant development in this regard has been its pivot towards the association of Southeast Asian nations. ASEAN. Facilitated by sweeping trade agreements like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, the ASEAN bloc, has now officially overtaken the United States as China's single largest export destination. The numbers are telling. In April of 2025, as China's exports to the US fell, its shipments to ASEAN nations surged by over 20%. This reorientation extends beyond its immediate neighborhood. China has systematically expanded its economic footprint across the global south, making deep inroads into markets in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. By positioning itself as the indispensable economic partner for the developing world, China is not only securing new revenue streams, but also building a broad coalition of nations whose economic interests are increasingly aligned with Beijing, not Washington. This global outreach provides China with a crucial economic buffer, allowing it to absorb the shock of American tariffs, while simultaneously expanding its international influence. This global outreach is most tangibly embodied by the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure and investment project that serves as the centerpiece of China's foreign policy. The BRI is far more than an economic program. It is a grand strategic vision to reshape the global economic map with China at its center. By financing and building ports, railways, pipelines, and digital infrastructure across Asia, Africa, and Europe, Beijing is not just creating new markets for its goods and construction firms. It is also fostering a deep and lasting dependency among participating nations. These projects often come with significant debt burdens, giving Beijing powerful leverage over the domestic and foreign policies of debtor countries. This debt trap diplomacy, as critics have labeled it, allows China to secure long-term leases on strategic assets, gain preferential access to natural resources, and ensure political loyalty in international forums like the United Nations. In this way, China's trade diversification strategy becomes a powerful tool of geopolitical influence, systematically building a bloc of nations whose economic survival and future growth are inextricably linked to Beijing's continued goodwill. Furthermore, China has demonstrated a sophisticated ability to navigate and circumvent U.S. trade barriers through the strategic use of third countries. In response to tariffs, Chinese manufacturers have not simply abandoned their global ambitions. They have adapted by relocating parts of their production processes. A significant amount of manufacturing has been shifted to neighboring countries with lower labor costs, such as Vietnam, Malaysia, and Thailand. This practice, known as transshipment, allows Chinese companies to assemble products in these nations and then label them with a new country of origin, for example, made in Vietnam. These goods can then be exported to the United States, effectively skirting the tariffs, specifically targeting products made in China. This loophole has proven difficult for the U.S. to close, as it requires the cooperation of host countries to enforce complex rules of origin. While the U.S. is working to negotiate stricter anti-transshipment clauses in its trade agreements, Thousands of companies are believed to be using this method to misrepresent the origin of their goods. This strategic relocation of assembly lines not only neutralizes the immediate impact of tariffs, but also further integrates the economies of Southeast Asia into China's own supply chain, reinforcing its central role in regional manufacturing. Perhaps China's most formidable advantage lies in its sheer dominance of global manufacturing and its control over supply chains that are critical to the world economy. For decades, it has cultivated its status as the world's factory, building an industrial ecosystem of unmatched scale, efficiency, and complexity. This manufacturing superpower status gives it a unique form of leverage. China possesses an unparalleled capacity to produce a vast spectrum of goods, from low-cost consumer electronics to high-tech industrial machinery, with a level of precision and consistency that is difficult to replicate. This vast and deeply entrenched industrial base was not built overnight. It is the result of decades of state planning, massive infrastructure investment, and the cultivation of a skilled labor force. Consequently, the notion that the United States or other Western nations can simply reshore these supply chains is a gross oversimplification. Rebuilding such a complex and integrated manufacturing ecosystem would be a turbulent, prohibitively expensive, and multi-decade endeavor, a reality that makes the world's continued dependence on Chinese manufacturing a structural feature of the global economy for the foreseeable future. Within this manufacturing empire, China holds a definitive trump card: its near monopoly over the mining and processing of rare earth elements, REs. These 17 metallic elements are obscure to the average consumer, but are indispensable ingredients in virtually every piece of modern advanced technology. They are essential for producing the powerful magnets used in electric vehicles and wind turbines, the lasers used in telecommunications and defense systems, and the superconductors that will power the next generation of computing. China's control over this market is nothing short of breathtaking. It accounts for approximately 70% of the world's rare earth mining and, more critically, a staggering 90% of the complex, environmentally hazardous refining process. The West outsourced this dirty and difficult work to China decades ago, and in doing so, handed Beijing an immense strategic weapon. China has demonstrated that it is not hesitant to weaponize this dominance. It has a documented history of using REs as a tool of political coercion, most famously in 2010, when it cut off exports to Japan during a territorial dispute. More recently, Beijing has implemented broad, new export controls that could, in effect, grant it veto power over the entire global high-tech supply chain. These regulations could be interpreted to require foreign companies to seek Beijing's explicit approval before exporting any advanced product from an American-made F-35 fighter jet to a German-engineered MRI, machine that contains even trace amounts of Chinese-sourced rare earths. This gives China a powerful lever to disrupt its adversaries' most critical industries at will, while the U.S. and its allies are now scrambling to build their own rare earth supply chains, experts agree that it will take many years, if not decades, and hundreds of billions of dollars in investment to even begin to challenge China's entrenched position. In the short to medium term, this dependency remains one of America's most acute vulnerabilities. Beyond its control of critical raw materials, China has also established a commanding lead in the next generation industries that will drive future economic growth. Its dominance in the renewable energy sector is a case in point. In 2004, China produced less than 2% of the world's solar cells. By 2024, that number had soared to an incredible 80%. Through massive government subsidies and a relentless focus on economies of scale, China has made solar panels so inexpensive that it has effectively driven most international competitors out of the market. This not only benefits China's domestic energy transition, but also makes countries around the world dependent on Chinese technology to meet their climate goals. As nations from Southeast Asia to South America seek to lower their energy costs and reduce carbon emissions, they are turning to Chinese suppliers, further integrating their economies into Beijing's orbit and expanding its soft power. This dominance extends to electric vehicles, EVs, batteries, and other green technologies, where Chinese firms are now global leaders in both production and innovation, flooding international markets with subsidized, high quality, and low cost goods that are difficult for other nations to compete with. In stark contrast to China's strategic cohesion and long term planning, the United States finds itself hampered by a series of deep seated economic and political vulnerabilities. Chief among these is a lingering structural dependence on China for a vast range of goods. Decades of globalization and corporate offshoring have resulted in an American economy that is deeply reliant on China for both low-cost consumer items that keep inflation in check and for critical inputs that are essential for its own domestic industries. From the packing tape used in every warehouse to the electronic components in every automobile, the Made in China label is woven into the very fabric of American commerce. This reality means that tariffs are a double-edged sword for Washington. While they are intended to punish China, they also impose significant costs on American businesses and consumers, driving up prices and creating supply chain disruptions. The immense difficulty and cost of reshoring these supply chains means that this dependency is not easily undone, giving China a persistent underlying leverage. This economic vulnerability is compounded by the inherent instability of the American political system. The short 4-year election cycle in the United States creates a climate of profound policy uncertainty. Business leaders are hesitant to make the massive long-term capital investments required to build new factories and reshore manufacturing in the US, when they know that a new administration could reverse course on tariffs and trade strategy overnight. A pro-tariff president might be replaced by one who favors free trade, rendering billions of dollars in new investments unprofitable. This political volatility stands in sharp contrast to China's consistent state-directed industrial policy, which can be sustained over decades. This gives Chinese firms a more predictable environment in which to operate and plan for the long term. Furthermore, democratic societies like the United States have a demonstrably lower tolerance for sustained economic pain than an authoritarian state like China. The American government is highly susceptible to domestic pressure from a volatile stock market, rising unemployment, or consumer anxiety over inflation. A president facing a tough re-election campaign cannot afford to ignore these pressures. Chinese leaders, on the other hand, operate without this direct electoral constraint. The Chinese Communist Party has repeatedly emphasized the nation's greater tolerance for suffering, suggesting a willingness to endure short-term economic hardship in pursuit of long-term strategic goals. In a protracted trade war of attrition, this ability to absorb economic blows and maintain political stability gives China a significant psychological and strategic advantage. Beijing knows that it can likely outlast the political will of any single American administration. Ironically, many of the United States' own policies have inadvertently strengthened China's hand. The aggressive use of sanctions and export controls, particularly on advanced technology, has served as the primary catalyst for China's intense drive for self-sufficiency. By attempting to cripple firms like Huawei, the U.S. effectively forced China to accelerate its domestic innovation, ultimately resulting in a more resilient and capable Chinese tech industry. Had the U.S. pursued a strategy of continued integration, China might have remained comfortably dependent on American technology. Instead, Washington's actions created the very technological competitor it sought to prevent. Similarly, the Trump administration's willingness to impose sweeping tariffs on traditional American allies, such as the European Union, Japan, and Canada, created deep fissures in the Western alliance. This alienation of its partners created a diplomatic vacuum that China was only too happy to fill. It provided Beijing with the perfect opportunity to court these disillusioned regions with promises of stable trade relationships and market access, further isolating the U.S. and undermining its efforts to build a united front against Chinese trade practices. However, to paint China's position as unassailable would be to ignore the significant and growing internal challenges that threaten its stability and continued economic ascent. The nation is currently navigating a series of severe domestic headwinds that could potentially undermine its strategic advantage. The most prominent of these is a profound crisis in its property market. For decades, real estate was the primary engine of China's growth and the main store of wealth for its middle class. The recent downturn, marked by defaulting developers and falling property values, has sent shockwaves through the economy. This has led to a crisis of confidence among consumers who, fearing for their financial security, have dramatically pulled back on spending and are now saving at record high rates. This weak domestic demand creates a dangerous deflationary pressure where falling prices lead to lower business profits, wage cuts, and further consumer reticence, a vicious cycle that is difficult to break. This economic malaise is exacerbated by a severe and structural youth unemployment problem. Each year, millions of highly educated graduates from China's top universities enter the workforce, only to find a stark mismatch between their skills and the available jobs. There are simply not enough white-collar, high-skilled positions to absorb this massive influx of talent. At the same time, the private sector, particularly in the tech and real estate industries that have historically been the largest employers of young graduates, has been hit hard by a government crackdown and the broader economic slowdown. This has left a generation of ambitious young people feeling disillusioned and anxious about their future, a sentiment captured by social media trends like lying flat. This social discontent poses a direct challenge to the unwritten social contract in China, where the Communist Party's legitimacy rests on its ability to deliver consistent economic growth and prosperity. This simmering discontent strikes at the very core of the Communist Party's legitimacy. For decades, the CCP has maintained its grip on power through an implicit pact with its citizens. In exchange for forfeiting political freedoms, the people were guaranteed ever rising living standards and economic opportunity. This model thrived during the era of hypergrowth, but as the economy slows and structural inequalities become more pronounced, the foundations of this social contract are beginning to crack. The disillusionment of the youth is particularly perilous for the regime. This is a generation that has known nothing but prosperity and has higher expectations than any before it. Their inability to find meaningful work commensurate with their education represents a failure of the state to uphold its end of the bargain. If left unaddressed, this widespread anxiety could curdle into broader social and political instability, posing a more significant long-term threat to the party's rule than any external pressure from the United States. The trade war in this context becomes a convenient external scapegoat, allowing the leadership to deflect blame for these deep-seated domestic problems, but it does not solve the underlying fragility of the system. Furthermore, China's strategy of diversifying its exports is beginning to encounter friction. While it has successfully pivoted to new markets in Southeast Asia and beyond, these nations are now starting to push back against the flood of cheap Chinese goods. Local industries in countries like Thailand and Indonesia are struggling to compete with heavily subsidized Chinese imports, leading to growing calls for protectionist measures. These governments are beginning to impose their own tariffs and value-added taxes on Chinese products to shield their domestic manufacturers. This rising protectionism demonstrates that while these new markets can absorb some of China's excess capacity, they cannot fully replace the sheer scale and purchasing power of the American consumer. China's diversification strategy, therefore, may be reaching its natural limits, forcing Beijing to confront the reality that it cannot solve its overcapacity problem through exports alone. These internal challenges, a fragile domestic economy, social discontent, and resistance in new markets, represent the most significant constraints on China's ability to indefinitely sustain its upper hand in global trade disputes. In conclusion, the balance of power in the US-China trade relationship has irrevocably shifted. Through a combination of strategic foresight, massive state-directed investment, and a patient long-term approach, China has successfully transformed itself from a dependent manufacturing hub into a resilient and technologically advancing economic power. The 2018 trade war, intended to bring Beijing to heel, instead acted as a catalyst, accelerating China's quest for self-reliance in critical technologies like semiconductors and artificial intelligence. By simultaneously diversifying its export markets away from the United States and cementing its control over indispensable global supply chains, most notably rare earth elements, China has equipped itself with a powerful arsenal of economic levers. It has astutely capitalized on America's own vulnerabilities, its short political cycles, its lower tolerance for economic disruption, and its propensity to alienate allies to fortify its negotiating position. While China is by no means immune to challenges, facing significant internal pressures from a slowing economy and a restless younger generation, its core strategic position remains remarkably strong. It has demonstrated an ability to withstand American tariffs, adapt its economic model, and counter with its own potent measures. The United States is now confronting a peer competitor that does not play by the old rules and possesses the economic might and political will to endure a protracted conflict.
Coughing. Follow me.